Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Left Speaks. Today is April the 25th, 3 months and 3 weeks removed from the insurrection on January the 6th, for which there still have been no consequences for former President Donald Trump for inciting the riot. Today, we're going to go over DC Statehood, whether or not we should add a 51st state, the District of Columbia. We're going to go into the arguments for and against it. As always, we're going to provide sources. We're going to look at some videos. We're going to have Republicans who argue against it. We're going to have Democrats who are arguing for it. And we're going to try to find the truth of the matter and what is most fair and democratic and American regarding voter representation in Congress. After that, as always, phone lines are open now. If you need to jump in, the audio's there. We'll have a discussion with anybody who wishes to have a discussion regarding it. And then, of course, last week's topic, policing and Black Lives Matter in America, is also open as well for discussion. Today may be a shorter show. It depends entirely on the amount of calls we get. DC Statehood seems pretty open and shut in terms of being a case to me. I don't see a good argument against it. But like I said, we'll go into the best ones that Republicans are presenting currently. Past that, welcome everybody. I appreciate you being here. And thank you, Dash Mickey, for jumping in the chat already. Oh, Hardwood and Sock, thanks for being here. Hey, you made it on time. That's the first time I think you've gotten in at the beginning, man. I appreciate it. So an overview for DC Statehood.
For 60 years, 50 states, but Congress is now one step closer to adding another.
DC Statehood is an idea whose time has come.
The House passing a bill that would make Washington, District of Columbia, the state of Washington Douglas Commonwealth, honoring abolitionist Frederick Douglass. The mayor would become the new governor, and the 700,000 plus people living in D.C., who already pay the most federal taxes per capita, would get federal voting rights, including 2 new senators. That would almost certainly mean 2 more Democrats, given D.C.'s political leanings, with the GOP intensely opposed to statehood.
Democrat support is really about of H.R. 51. Democratic partisanship, Democrat power.
Some Republicans argue D.C. is too small.
D.C. wouldn't even qualify as a singular congressional district.
It does have more people than Vermont or Wyoming. Some have argued D.C.'s not Wyoming.
Wyoming is a well-rounded, working-class state.
Democrats blast that as thinly veiled racism.
I had no idea there were so many syllables in the word white.
And one Republican argued this.
D.C. would be the only state without an airport, without a car dealership.
D.C. does have car dealerships, and the Constitution doesn't mention those anyway. As for the Founding Fathers, some conservatives say they never intended that the nation's capital become a state.
Anybody who knows a law book from a J. Crew catalog knows it's unconstitutional.
Constitution that says the district cannot become a state.
If that happens, D.C. would have the highest percentage of black residents in the country. Top Democrats frame statehood as a civil rights issue, and supporters include the Biden administration, about half of all voters nationwide, and a lot of folks who call the district home.
It makes me feel as if I am being robbed of a right that I should have.
It feels that my voice in Congress is not represented.
So a lot was covered there. Brief synopsis. DC, the District of Columbia, has 700,000 people in it. That's more than 2 other states, Vermont and Wyoming, and it's equivalent to the state of Alaska. It doesn't have a lot of land. It wouldn't be a very big state if we were to add it as a state, obviously. My response to that is people vote. People get representation, not land. That's the whole point of a democracy. We got rid of that whole property requirement when it came to voting a couple hundred years ago. Okay. The stuff about not having a car dealership, while blatantly false, DC would have car dealerships, is also completely and entirely irrelevant. There's nothing in the Constitution that requires a state to have a car dealership. There's nothing in the Constitution that requires your geographic area to have a car dealership for you to be able to vote. Considering I work in automotive finance, it might be nice, business-wise, if you had to have a car dealership to be able to vote. But they didn't even have car dealerships or cars when we founded this country. Now, as for the founders never intended the District of Columbia to have a say in Congress, to have representation. The Constitution specifies the district. It does not specify how large or how small that district can be. It says it can be no bigger than 10 square miles, so the district can't be more than 100 miles, essentially, large. Currently, we're sitting at about 66 miles. But it doesn't say that it has to be 10 square miles or that it has to be 6 or 7 square miles. It just says whatever we define as the district, they don't want to have representation in Congress. So if we made a new state out of the area around the district, the Constitution does not speak to that. Dash Mickey, they're just making excuses now, worried about airports and car dealerships. I tend to entirely agree with you. The only consistent Republican argument I have heard against DC statehood that holds any logical sense to me is that it would add 2 Democratic senators. That's the short version. There doesn't seem to be any constitutional grounds, since we can define the size of the District of Columbia however we would want. The best argument is the Constitution one. I disagree. There's nothing saying that the District of Columbia has to be X amount of size. There's just something in the Constitution saying that it can't be larger than 10 square miles. It has nothing to do with the size of the district itself. And the new bill would create a smaller federal district, which would include the White House, the congressional grounds, and the Capitol Mall, if I remember correctly. I agree the Supreme Court could interpret the Constitution for the meaning of the district, but the Constitution is very plain on it. The Constitution specifically states that the District of Columbia should be no larger than 2 square miles. It says nothing about the size of how small it can be. In fact, the congressional or the District of Columbia has already shrunk in the 1800s when a 20-mile section returned to the state of Virginia. So we've already shrunk it once. It started off with just the ground Maryland gave to the feds. Then Virginia added 20 miles. And then when, the people in Virginia were worried that the District of Columbia was going to outlaw the slave trade, they said, peace. We want to go back to Virginia where slavery is still legal. And they went back to Virginia. So they're no longer considered part of the district. Supreme Court had nothing to say about shrinking the size of the District of Columbia at that point. So I don't see why it would be relevant now, aside from partisan politics. More importantly, federally, these are the highest taxed citizens in the nation, federally taxed, and they have 0 voting representation in Congress. They have 1 member of the House who can't vote. They can go in and say, hey, we want this, but they have no actual voice. They don't get to vote on anything. It is literally the definition of taxation without representation. And in this country, as I recall, we fought a whole war about that concept specifically. So like I said, I am hard pressed to see a good argument against making DC a state besides we don't want 2 Democratic senators. And in this country, in a democracy, you don't get to say, hey, those people don't get voting rights because I don't like the way they're going to vote. Democracy doesn't mean you always get your way. It means you get a voice. And right now, the citizens of the District of Columbia have no voice. And they pay federal taxes, more per person than you or I do. I'm not going to get a big pushback from you on this one. Good, then call your congressman and tell him you support it. Like I said, by definition, it's taxation without representation. But to be fair, let's jump into some of the counter arguments. This was an interview on Fox News. The anchor kind of screws up and inadvertently makes the case for DC statehood. And then we're going to look at the congressman, the chair for Ways and Means, if I remember correctly, Republican chair, arguing against it.
Let's bring in Kentucky Congressman James Comer. He's ranking member of the House Oversight Committee. So they'll argue that, as Nancy Pelosi said, residents of D.C., they pay taxes, they serve in uniform, they contribute to the economic power of the nation. Why shouldn't they be a state? Let's hear what you have to say.
Well, they shouldn't be a state because our founding fathers made it clear they wanted the capital city to be independent of any states. Washington, D.C. is the best represented city in America in Congress. Each member of Congress spends over half their year in Washington, D.C. If Washington, D.C. needs something, then the members of Congress will make sure of it. Plus, the 23rd Amendment gives Washington, D.C. 3 electoral college votes in the presidential election. So pound for pound, Washington, D.C. has more influence than any major city in America on presidential elections.
Okay, but so if you live there, though, like I used to for a long time, members of Congress, like somebody from Kentucky, for example, doesn't necessarily represent my interests in the city. I'm not arguing for DC statehood. I'm just saying these are their arguments. So if you're a resident there, it seems to make sense to you, to them. I get your point of view in terms of the founding fathers, but the other issue is this leads to, presumably, more Democrats in the Senate and tipping that balance of power.
No True Leftist, welcome to the stream. I like counter arguments personally, but I think you're being sarcastic. Hardwood and Sock, I don't know if Manchin will budge on this one either. I don't either, but that's not an argument for what ought to be. That's just an argument for the way the system is right now. That doesn't mean we should not keep pushing for it. I mean, these folks do not have representation. As you noticed, he pointed to the Constitution. The founding fathers said that they wanted the capital city. No, they specified the federal district, the governing district in the Constitution. So that argument immediately drops water. As for the second opinion that, oh, they're the best represented in the entire country regarding presidential elections, well, that may be true. They do have 3 federal electors, but that has nothing to do with Congress, which has everything to do with passing laws and taxes and everything else. So we're talking about giving citizens representation in Congress. So that's a complete red herring, and it's irrelevant as well. And he knows this, okay? The last argument, which is the only one that seems to make some kind of sense and directly address the issue, is, hey, D.C. is the best represented because every congressman and every senator spends some time here, right? And we represent the interests of Washington, D.C. So even though I'm from the state of Texas, or I'm from the state of Alaska, or I'm from the state of Louisiana, or any of the other 50 states, I hold the interest of America at heart. That includes Washington, D.C. So Washington, D.C. is getting the best representation out of any place in the country. This is almost identical to the argument that the British made when the American colonies could not vote and had no representation on the taxes that were passed in our colonies. Almost identical. They called it virtual representation. They said, even though you don't have a seat in Parliament, we represent and look out for all the interest of British citizens everywhere. And this became a major thing when they tried to tax the American colonies after the French and Indian War. Started with the Stamp Act, the tea tax that led to the Boston Tea Party, started with the Stamp Act Congress, where we rejected this idea flat out, led to the First Continental Congress, led to the Second Continental Congress, and ultimately to the American Revolution. We said this virtual representation idea, that you living across the ocean, not from my area, not from my state, not from my city, can represent me? Yeah, that's total bullshit.
And so take all of this together, and it sparked a debate among the colonists whether it was just and right to impose taxes on the colonists who had precisely no representatives in Parliament. And this is where we get the famous phrase, no taxation without representation. Like somehow, somewhere, the colonists had gotten this crazy idea that they were involved in a social contract with their government and had natural rights that could not be violated. And where would they get such foolish ideas? Ah, the Enlightenment. Thanks, John Locke. Thanks, Rousseau. Thanks, Voltaire. Thanks, Kant. And honestly, if you asked me to name any more Enlightenment thinkers, I just can't. Anyways, the colonists started protesting all this taxation without representation. British officials argued right back, oh no, you don't understand. You all are represented, but it's virtual representation. To which the colonists responded, son, you're heading the right way for a virtual smack bottom. But to the British, this made perfect sense. The members of Parliament, even though none of them came from the colonies, represented not necessarily locations, but rather the interests of all British classes. But colonial leaders were all like, nuh-uh, and argued that the only people who could truly represent their interests were those who were from the colonies. So to be clear, there was a big discrepancy between how the British understood representation, which is to say by classes of people, and how Americans understood it, which is to say by location. So back in the colonies, there were a few organized groups that started to give voice to these protestations, namely the Sons of Liberty, the Daughters of Liberty, and Vox Populi. And these groups included in their ranks all manner of folks like merchants and traders and artisans, and they sprang up especially in response to the Stamp Act. And one of the results of this more organized resistance was the gathering of the Stamp Act Congress in 1765, which included 27 delegates from 9 colonies.
So basically, recapping what I just said, I don't care if you live over in Britain and you think you can represent my interest here in the United States. You don't live here. You can't. Americans had a fundamentally different understanding of what representation meant. And they wanted you to be from the area. So this argument about, oh, well, I can represent Washington, D.C., and all of Congress can represent Washington, D.C. because they're Americans and we're from all over the country. You're not from there. They are being taxed, and they are paying more in taxes than any other state in the country per person. And we rejected this argument of virtual representation right about 1776. So for you to trot it out now, Republicans, not all Republicans, but for you to trot it out now fundamentally goes against the values this country was founded on. Period. Just for kicks, you'll try to think of arguments against it. Hey, I've been trying to find them, brother, so more power to you. I agree with you. I've been trying to think of arguments against it too. Now, one of the things he mentioned was the Sons of Liberty. Hey, Ricky, welcome in. So who were some of the members of the Sons of Liberty? We've got Samuel Adams in there. We've got Paul Revere. We've got John Hancock, Patrick Henry. I recognize a lot of founding fathers involved in this. So if you want to ask, what did the founding fathers believe? And what would they have thought about this? And what they would have thought about the argument of virtual representation? They've already told you. That argument led directly to the First Continental Congress. And then when it was ignored, led directly to the Second Continental Congress, which led directly to the American Revolution. You don't get to tax people if they don't have representation in Congress, if they don't have a say in the laws and the taxes. From Ricky the Great One, taxation without representation is a pillar of democracy. I mean, why else rule if you can't do it without the consent of the masses? The King of England in 1776 would have agreed with you. Hardwood and socks. So if the federal government if the federal government would decide to not tax the residents of DC, would your argument still hold? Potentially, no. But they're American citizens subject to American laws. So unless you're going to exclude them, See, I'm in favor of Puerto Rican statehood too, if they want it, which recent polling has seemed to show that they do. I don't see a reason to artificially limit statehood for American citizens who want to become full participants in the American government. Yeah, Hardwood and Socks trying to play devil's advocate to anybody who's wondering right now. He already said at the outset that doesn't really have a strong position against DC statehood. I've really been unable to find one, as I mentioned. So let's look at what the real opposition is. We're going to go back to that same interview.
This vote this week on making Washington, D.C. the 51st state is about one thing: creating 2 new Democrat Senate seats. That's all. We can argue the merits. I can give you dozens of reasons why it's a bad idea. But at the end of the day, it's all about a Democrat political power grab to create 2 new Democrat Senate seats so they can end the filibuster and they can pass all the liberal progressive legislation that Nancy Pelosi's forcing down the throats of the Democrats in the House. So I'm going to do everything in my power to be against this bill, and I think every Republican in both the House and the Senate will vote against DC statehood.
Do you see this idea linked to the idea that we talked about last week about packing the court?
Absolutely. When you have Joe Manchin already on the record saying he's not going to support ending the filibuster and he's not inclined to vote to pack the court, then the Democrats realize they need to go to Plan B. And Plan B is to create 2 new Democrat Senate seats. And with respect to representation in Washington, D.C., I'm the ranking member of the House Oversight Committee. Eleanor Holmes-Horton is on the committee as well. And she is a very vocal member of the committee. So Washington, D.C. has a delegate in Congress. And again, I don't think there's a city in America that's better represented in Congress than Washington, D.C.
Eleanor Holmes-Horton does not get to vote. She gets to sit there and say things. She doesn't get to vote. So she does not have a voice representing D.C. in Congress. Virtual representation that Representative Comer there alluded to again was one of the things this nation rejected at its founding. So for you to sit here and make that argument, Representative Comer, is un-American. And the founding fathers agree with me, as evidenced by how many of them were members of the First Continental Congress, the Second Continental Congress. John Hancock, member of the Sons of Liberty, you know, who wrote his big-ass signature on the Declaration of Independence. But the main argument you saw there, which again is the one that's the only one that seems to consistently come up, as we'll point out when we get to Senator Ted Cruz, Senator Ted Cancun. The only argument that consistently comes up is they're going to elect 2 Democratic senators. Tough shit. You don't get to tell people they don't get to vote because you don't like how they might vote. I don't get to tell the state of Texas or the state of Oklahoma or the state of Alabama that they don't get any senators because I don't want any Republican senators in the Senate. In this specific case, we're talking about American citizens who pay federal taxes, who do not have any representation in Congress, any voting representation. Nobody's talking about taking California and splitting it into 2 states so we can add 2 Democratic senators. Nobody's talking about taking Washington or New York or an existing state and splitting it up just so you can get more representation, like the Republicans did with North and South Dakota back in the day. And there is nothing inherently about DC that says it would have to vote Democrat forever. I bet if DC had gotten statehood back when the Republicans were against slavery, if black people had been considered citizens back then, it would have voted Republican. You might have to change your policies to appeal to those citizens with their newfound right to vote and representation in Congress. And you might not want to change your policies. And you don't have to, but they don't have to vote for you if you don't. You don't get to tell people they don't have a right to vote just because you don't like how they might vote. Puerto Rico, from the guys I work with, definitely don't want to be a state. They hate taxes. None of my guys want Puerto Rico to be a state, so I'll legit push on that one. That's why I said it depends on polling data for me on whether Puerto Rico should or should not be a state. If they want to be a state, they're more than welcome as far as I'm concerned. They've been in American territory for long enough. If they don't want to be a state and want to maintain their territorial status, I completely understand that as well. I see arguments for and against that one. But like I said, if they want to become part of, or a full part of American democracy, I would support them. I've seen polling data that says that they do, and I've seen polling data that says that they don't. The Dems have till 2022 to get all this shit passed. I feel Republicans will come back strong in 2022. Hopefully not if this country has any memory whatsoever, but unfortunately I'm afraid that you may be correct in that regard, Hardwood and Sock. Ted Cancun up next.
And DC Statehood, their push here is part of a broader effort. We have Democratic control of the White Houses and both houses of Congress, and their number one priority, it's not COVID, it's not vaccinations, it's not reopening jobs, it's not getting kids back in school, it's not doing anything substantive. Their number one priority is they want to stay in power forever. So you look at what they're pushing. They're pushing DC Statehood. Why? Because they want 2 new Democratic senators. They're pushing H.R. 1, what many are calling the Corrupt Politicians Act, because they want to federalize elections. They want to register millions of illegal aliens and felons to vote and keep Democrats in power for the next 100 years. and they want to pack the U.S. Supreme Court and add 4 new left-wing justices because they want to change the rules and maintain power. That's their priority, and it's not what they should be doing.
You know, in case the public did not know or did not recognize with the mask on, Representative Mondrian Jones is also the person who was there for the rollout of packing the court outside the Supreme Court about a week or so ago. Those remarks are getting a lot of heat today. And so I'm curious, when it makes its way to the Senate, what really happens in terms of the rhetoric here?
Well, in terms of the substance, the chances of DC statehood or packing the court passing into law are 0 if, and this is a big if the Senate filibuster rules remain the case. If it is the case that it takes 60 votes to move forward, which has been the case in the Senate for a long, long time, then both of those are dead on arrival. The Democrats know that. That's why they want to blow up the Senate rules, end the filibuster, in order to change the fundamental election rules. And so it all comes down to really Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, 2 Democrats, the lone 2 Democrats who have said they wouldn't end the filibuster. If they end the filibuster, they will make D.C. a state. If they end the filibuster, they will pack the Supreme Court. This is all about power, and that's why there's so much pressure on those 2 Democratic senators.
Got it. And I had started this with, it's a 2-pronged power grab. You've got the DC statehood and the filibuster. There could be more. We'll cover it when it happens.
Ricky the Great One, the only argument is Democrats bad. Regardless, it's inevitable that the political pendulum will swing in the opposite direction eventually. Stop making it political and just let them have some representation. I agree. That's the only argument he made the whole time. My political opponents are trying to gain power. We're not going to talk about the substance of the issue. We're not going to talk about the fact that these citizens, American citizens, tax-paying American citizens in Washington, D.C., have no representation in government, in Congress. No, let's not talk about the actual issue. Let's just talk about how it's bad because my team, they don't want to vote for my team. Dash Mickey, I feel like that's a fallacious argument. He's trying to bring up different issues. It's a gish gallop. It's a dishonest debate tactic. Senator Cruz was on the debate team at Princeton. He fucking knows it's dishonest, and he's doing it anyway. What a gish gallop is when I throw out 100, 200 different things to talk about in my allotted 2 to 5 minutes. And then my opponent, when they have their 2 to 5 minutes, has to go through how everything I just said is wrong, and they never get to make their case. And he knows exactly what he's doing. Like I said, he was a member of the Princeton debate team. He knows it's dishonest, and he's using it anyway because he's putting party over country again. But we all know Senator Ted Cancun could give less than a damn about serving the people he's supposed to represent. As evidenced by when Texas froze over, he wasn't trying to help nobody. Well, maybe his family when he hopped on a plane to go take a impromptu vacation. But the dishonesty here, the dishonest tactics, the distraction from the main point, the basic un-Americanness of taxing people without giving them any representation. He doesn't want to address any of that. Dash Mickey, okay, thanks. Philosophy student at the moment, still learning. No problem. Very true. Ted Cruz is just selfish. Ted Cruz is about party over country and power for Ted Cruz. And both parties in Congress hate Ted Cruz. Republicans and Democrats have both come out saying he's the most hated member of the Senate. And after what he did during Texas, when Texas had its crisis, not a month ago, might have been 2 months ago now, where Texas froze over and he was just like, peace. I'm going to take me, my wife, my 2 daughters, none of whom are toddlers or infants, right? We're talking like, I think it was 11 and up. And we're just going to off to Cancun. And then when it's scheduled to get warmer in Texas, we'll come back. And we're going to leave the family dog in the house to freeze to death potentially. Ted Cruz doesn't even give a shit about his own family dog. That ought to tell you everything you need to know about Ted Cancun. From Ricky the Great One, in the words of fellow Republican John Boner, Ted Cruz, go fuck yourself. Yes, exactly. Former Republican Speaker of the House, if I remember correctly. Oh, Ricky the Great One got nabbed by Streamlabs. That's a direct quote. I'll give him a pass. I'm sorry on the mod catching you. Dash Mickey tried to let that one through. Yeah, I need to work on the language on the mod. I really don't mind foul language, especially when it's a direct quote from one Republican to another. So, one potential solution I've seen to this, I guess 2 now, because Hardwood and Sock brought up one. Hey, just don't tax them. And if you do that, I might move to Washington, D.C. myself, or at least maintain my residence there, right? But I've seen a couple potential solutions to this that do not require DC statehood. One of them being from conservative columnist George Will, one of them being from the Cato Institute, and one of them being from the Heritage Foundation. And they basically involve retrocession. So, like Virginia gave land to be part of the District of Columbia, and then that land said, hey, we want to keep our slaves, we're going back to Virginia, peace. Okay. The argument is the part of DC that doesn't need to be the federal district, Congress and the White House itself, that's not specific to federal governing, could just go back to Maryland. And then it would be part of Maryland, and those tax-paying American citizens would have their representation, and the Republicans wouldn't have to deal with two new Democratic senators. So let's just give DC, not the federal district, let's give the city of Washington back to Maryland. So let's look at that. The last polling I found on that was from 2016, specifically question 22. When asked in Maryland, would you support or oppose Maryland annexing Washington, D.C.? 28% support it. 44% are vastly opposed, outright. And 28% haven't educated themselves enough on the matter to have an opinion yet. The problem with this is, if you're part of Maryland and you add a big ass city, it's going to influence your state politics in a way that your state is not currently having to consider. So the easiest way to picture this, let's pretend you live in Arizona, right? And Arizona has some rural voters and it has some urban voters. Typically goes red. Last election, I would argue because of President Trump, went blue. If I suddenly took the city of Los Angeles, California, and magically made it part of Arizona, all of a sudden, everybody who lives in Arizona loses a lot of voting power Because every politician that's running in Arizona, there's a lot of voters in Los Angeles. So Maryland doesn't want it back because they don't want to have to deal with that. Maryland state politics are working just fine. We're happy here, thank you. We don't want you dumping a bunch of voters and a bunch of land back in our state that hasn't been a part of our state for 150, 200 years now. That makes sense to me. If I'm a voter in Maryland, if I live in Baltimore, or if I live in the county, I don't want my politicians all of a sudden having to cater to the whims of people in DC. And I haven't considered DC a part of my state for 200 years. Just like Arizona doesn't consider Los Angeles a part of its state. Just like Maine does not consider itself a part of Massachusetts like it used to be. I'm happy that it was part of it 200 years ago, but obviously they don't consider themselves the same anymore. So to say, hey, sorry, Maryland, you're just going to have to accept all of these new voters that you don't want and all of these new citizens that you don't want, seems pretty ridiculous on its face to me. Hardwood and Sock, you're all for not taxing them. Good luck, brother. The federal government doesn't tend to give up taxes all that easy. Virginia is blue anyway at this point. Split DC down the middle. Half goes to Maryland, half goes to Virginia. You support this. The Virginia portion of DC has already gone back to Virginia. The land that is currently DC is all from Maryland. Just a funny, you hate LA. I figured you'd hate LA. I mean, most conservatives hate LA. Just out of curiosity, have you ever been to Los Angeles? I wouldn't want to live there just because I hate traffic, but I mean, it's a nice city in a lot of places, in my opinion. But if I dumped LA into Pennsylvania by decree, you'd probably be pretty pissed off. And for those that don't know, Hardwood and Sock said on the air before that he lives in Pennsylvania. For Murky the Great One, not taxing them would be catastrophic and lead to further inequality. LA is a sad city. Oh, you used to be a flight attendant? You've been there plenty of times? Cool. I like the parts of LA. That's just me personally. I mean, I know everybody's got their own thing, but obviously tons of people live there. So a short graphic. In 2018, the district paid over $26 billion in federal taxes, more than 22 other states. 22. But does not have congressional representation and how that money is spent. Again, they're being taxed without representation. And they paid more than 22 other states. That's almost half. 86% of the people who live in DC are in favor of becoming their own state. They've been paying taxes for a long time now. Longer than the colonies did to Britain before the colonies jumped up in arms and revolted. More than almost half the other states in the country. If I lived in DC, I would be in favor of statehood too. 712,000 Americans, estimate, live in Washington, D.C. More than Wyoming and Vermont, equivalent to Alaska. When the district was established, it had a population of 3,000. All D.C. laws can be overruled by Congress currently without the protective rights of a state. What Congress says goes. You know, just like what Parliament said went for the colonies until the colonies, threw up their fingers and grabbed their muskets. Is it constitutional? Yes, the Constitution only dictates an upper limit on the size of the nation's capital. DC has already shrunk once before in 1846, as I've mentioned, when the western half was returned to Virginia because they were worried about DC outlawing slave trade. Is it financially viable? Yes, DC already operates like a state and has balanced its budget every year since 1997. That's better than most red states. Most red states receive more federal money. What about the government? DC Admissions Act retains a federal district that would serve as the capital. The smaller district includes the National Mall, Capitol Building, museums, and other government offices. Makes sense to me. And obviously, talk about it if you want to support it. Spread the word. Call your congressman. Hardwood and Sock, DC should try a revolution against the federal government. Jokes, sarcasm for all the TOS people out there, terms of service for Twitch and everything else. Nobody's advocating DC actually commits a revolution, just like in the olden days. I think it would be hilarious if DC just decided to shut down everything. You know, we're not going to pick up any trash around the Capitol buildings. We're not going to do any policing. We're not going to staff the airport. We're not going to staff those car dealerships that y'all think we don't have, but we actually have. We're not going to provide electricity. We're just not going to do any services whatsoever for the government. I think that would be a peaceful way to accomplish something. Because I guarantee if Senator Ted Cruz, Senator Ted Cancun, had to go work in the Capitol without air conditioning, we'd see him hop on another flight back to Mexico to sit on the beach again. That's just my bet. Ricky the Great One, as a Midwesterner, the homeless peeps were the epitome of destitution and the failure of proper safety nets. True, red states are paid for by blue states. Absolutely. The Heritage Foundation did track that for years. Texas was the last one that was contributing to the federal budget instead of receiving. And then magically they decided to quit tracking it. Hardwood and Sock, really poor leadership there too. Red states feed blue states, though, kind of a trade-off. I don't know how you mean red states feed blue states. We're talking money. All the all the red states receive more federal dollars. For every dollar they put in, they receive $1.01 to $1.02 to $1.03 to $5 back. The time for silence is over. Oh, thanks for the host. With the consolidation of farms, that argument is shrinking with farming. Oh, he's talking about physically feeding people with farming? I mean, that may be true, but kind of irrelevant. You can look at plenty of things that blue states would provide that red states don't. I mean, Silicon Valley in California provides lots of technology that didn't get developed in red states and got rolled out to the red states. Not to mention, not every red state has anything to do with farming. I don't see a whole lot of farms in Alaska. Exactly. It's a trade. That's what you're saying. That has nothing to do with federal dollars, though, right? If Nebraska provides food to California and California provides internet, you know, the creation of PCs to Nebraska, it's not a dollar to a dollar. We're talking about services rendered here. Oil ain't food, brother. I mean, unless you're going to make the case that blue states have absolutely zero natural resources, I don't see how this is really going to work out for you. I really don't. I don't disagree that oil is a necessity. California has oil too. Like I said, there are plenty of blue states with natural resources. I don't see what the point is here. Because we have natural resources, we should pay less in supporting the United States government as a whole. Seems kind of ridiculous. You're trying to argue here, leave you alone. Are you playing devil's advocate again, my friend? Ricky the Great One. True, the blue states provide tech that has made farming exponentially more effective and efficient. Yeah, and we also subsidize the hell out of crops in general. Machine vision, etc. Yeah. Well, the fact that Texas was, while it was a blue state, contributing to the federal budget, and then when it became a red state, or went back, I should say, to being a red state, it ceased contributing to the federal budget, points to the fact that this is just politics and has nothing to do with the actual resources within the state. I mean, hell, California used to be red under Reagan and now it's blue, but it's always contributed. So these are policy decisions. It's not an inability to contribute. Three minutes until the break, everybody. And then we'll jump into calls. I think I've finished making my case for DC statehood. At least I haven't found a good argument against it. And anybody who's not already, like, follow, subscribe on social media. I don't ask for your money, but if you want to share it on social media so we can get more people in here, have more competing views, and discuss these things and actually hash some stuff out, I would greatly appreciate it. You're not going to call me on DC, though? All right, well, I may make you say it live on the air that you support DC statehood. What do you want to call about? Just out of curiosity. The BLM stories from this week? Okay, sure. That sounds good. I might not be familiar with all of them, so you may have to catch me up from your point of view. All right, we're going to go ahead and take the break a little early, everybody. We'll be back about 5 minutes, 8 minutes after the break. I'll set the timer for everybody. Thank you, and I'll catch y'all in a few minutes. Got to get that coffee. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for sticking with me through the break. I have fresh coffee. We are ready to go. And as always, phone lines open, 855-915-5338, 815-915-LEFT, L-E-F-T. Hardwood and Sock, you are more than welcome to call in if you would like to, brother. And I'm betting everybody else went to go grab drinks, use the restroom, and everything else. Thank you. I appreciate it. You need a minute, or are you planning to call in immediately? Feel free, my man. It's open. Oh, Ricky went and got him something a little bit harder than coffee. I'm jealous, man. I can't do that on stream. What'd you get? We can talk about it. That's not against TOS. Rum and Coke? Oh, that sounds good. I'm a Crown and 7 man myself, personally. Ah, looks like Sock's calling in. I'll wait for the screener to quit doing it. I don't want it to conflict. Simple drink for a simple man. Crown and 7 ain't exactly complicated either, but I'm with you on that. Whatever anybody enjoys, have at it. Hey, brother, you're on the air, Sock. Welcome in.
Yo, what's up, man?
Nothing much. How's your week been, man?
You know, same old, same old.
Well, that's good.
It's working.
Yeah, same thing.
So obviously the Chauvin verdict was read this week, which, you know, I agree with.
So guilty on all three counts you agree with?
Yeah, but like I think Maxine Waters fucked up royally, because even the judge stated that basically she just gave them grounds for appeal and a really good case for it.
I can kind of see that. Not really, but they're going to appeal regardless. We know that. I mean, that's just part of the judicial system.
Yeah, I knew they were going to appeal regardless, but now it's like, now they have a legit case for appeal, not just, you know, not just like, oh, we don't like the decision, you know, we're going to appeal. Now it's like, all right, well, was this, you know, could it be considered jury tampering since they weren't sequestered? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, and it just, she made such a stupid decision, and it just, I don't like that people are defending her statements, because literally less than 12 hours later, National Guard was getting shot at. So it was like, come on, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I don't think you can draw a direct causal link between the two. I think what she said was stupid, but it's not the same thing as, you know, go march down to the courthouse and shoot at, you know, National Guard members.
Well, yeah, for sure. Like she wasn't specific in what she was saying, but I think that one can reasonably say that it was, you know, it was basically a threat in a way, you know what I mean? Like, if we don't get this, this is what's going to happen, you know?
Well, and see, I don't view it as a threat, more as a statement of fact. For those who are unaware, Maxine Waters is a Congress person, and basically said that, you know, if the verdict didn't come back the way that, you know, BLM wanted, that you could expect more protests and riots, and that they needed to get more confrontational. Would that be a fair summation from your understanding as well?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And see, I could have seen saying the same thing personally, right? That I think nobody that somewhat paid attention to this would have been remotely shocked if there would have been renewed protest had Chauvin been found not guilty or only guilty of manslaughter.
Oh, for sure. Which is why she didn't even need to go out and say anything.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's why her comments were just so unnecessary.
I agree they were unnecessary. I just don't think you can make a causal link to, because she made these statements, oh, there's going to be protest if, Chauvin's found not guilty, that, therefore somebody went out and shot at the National Guard. I don't think those two things connect together.
Yeah, but, well, you can, like, there is a line to be drawn there. I mean, while it's like, there's no guarantee that that's what it was. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That caused them to do that. There is a reasonable line that can be drawn to where the escalation with 12 hours after her comments, I mean, it's probably a coincidence, but you know what I mean? It's like, it's possible that it is possible that her comments had a direct, link to that,
It's possible, but you'd have to prove it, right? Because the burden of proof is on the person making that statement, that, Maxine Waters' statements had a direct impact on this person shooting at the National Guard. And I don't see I don't see enough evidence of that. I don't see that burden of proof has been made.
Oh, yeah, no, I agree. But at least we can agree that her comments were just dumb.
Yeah, I think it would have been smarter, like President Biden did, to wait till the jury was sequestered to say anything, right? But with BLM, I mean, you're talking about a movement that had, 26 million people take part in protests in the United States alone. There's going to be individuals that say stupid shit. And Ricky the Great One had a great point. It's not that she was organizing it directly, and I would agree. There's a big difference between organizing some kind of rally, riot, whatever, directly, and then just saying, hey, if this trial doesn't go the way that, anybody who watched the tape thinks it should go, right? It's obvious this guy was murdered, right? Then there's probably going to be protests and riots. And if you want to accomplish something, you're going to need to get more confrontational, because obviously it didn't work the last time.
Yeah, but, I just wish that she didn't make those comments, so this way that the ground for appeal would literally be nothing.
Well, you and I both agree that Chauvin would have appealed anyway. I do think he has grounds for appeal. I don't think that it's going to be grounds for overturning the case, because it doesn't change the facts of the case. But I'm not an attorney.
But I mean, I'm not a legal, expert either. But from I listened to 80% of that the court case.
I watched a lot of it on Ricky the Great stream. He streamed the whole damn thing, man.
Yeah, I was on PTNN, which is a conservative news, independent news outlet.
Okay.
And the host there agreed for manslaughter, but he was unsure about murder 2 and murder 3, which murder, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. I'm glad he's guilty, because obviously there was wrongdoing there, and I think he should go away for a while. But I don't think the state did a very good job of proving their case. Dr. Tobin was good, but I don't think their other witnesses were that good.
Well, I think the main damnation of the whole thing was the police chief for Minneapolis coming out and saying, no, that's not our training. That's not the way we do it. That's not what we teach. And then the multiple trainers from the police department coming out and saying, no, this was not what we teach. This is not what we train. This is not up to standard. But murder 2 in the state of Minnesota, Minneapolis specifically, right, is just basically, it's felony murder is my basic understanding, right? And they basically said at this point it was a felony assault, right? He's assaulting George Floyd, and because he died from that, therefore it's murder 2. And if you and I agree that this was unnecessary and it's assault at that point, then it's murder 2 under their definition. I know different states have different definitions for murder 2, but in Minnesota, I mean, I guess he should have murdered somebody in a different state. I don't know what else to tell you.
No, I'd rather not murder anyone at all.
I agree with you.
No, but that's really it about the Chauvin case, because like it's kind of open and shut. But just like I wish that it would have been open and shut for appeal too. Yeah. Whereas now it's not fully open and shut anymore.
No, I agree. I think he's probably got realistic grounds to appeal it. I don't think he has realistic grounds on that appeal to get it overturned. Right. That's the key for me. Like, I think he's got enough to take it to a judge and say, hey, I have a right to try and appeal this to a judge. But I think when a judge looks at the facts of this case, they're going to be like, okay, yeah, we looked at it and this was your appeal. But yeah, no, sorry. And Ricky the Great One points out, again, I'm referencing Ricky because he watched the whole thing when he was streaming. The biggest thing for him was the pulmonologist followed by the cardiologist. And the data was a huge help for the prosecution. I just don't see how he could have gotten just manslaughter in that state. Like I said, had he been in a different state with a different definition of murder too, then I could understand where your other conservative host was coming from.
Yeah. And that's probably where he was, conflating the issues. Because like when the judge was reading out like the definitions of the charges and whatnot, I was like, well, they proved that, Yeah. So like, I mean, I'm not one of those, no, he's innocent because no, what he did was fucked up. So, yeah.
Well, and to me, that's the biggest thing with the whole Chauvin trial is I just, like, as a conservative, why would you die on that hill? I mean, it's so blatantly obvious that what he did was wrong. And it seems like the easy answer to this would have been like, yeah, this guy crossed the line and, pardon the language, fuck him, we're going to prosecute him and lock him up. But that doesn't apply to all police, right? I mean, it's why would you defend this? It's so blatantly obvious that you don't need to kneel on a man's neck for 9.5 minutes, 2.5 of which he's, basically unresponsive. And you can't even claim that you're worried about him being a threat because you got your hands in your pockets for like 2 minutes while you're kneeling on his neck.
Yeah. No, but speaking of like dying on a hill, there was a story like this week that I will die on a hill for.
Yeah, fire away.
The Micaiah Bryant one.
Okay.
I don't know if you've seen that body cam footage or anything.
I've seen parts of it, but go ahead and give a rundown for the audience.
So basically, what happened was there was a 911 call placed about a woman with a knife trying to stab people.
Yep.
Right. Which is my interpretation of the 911 call. The 911 caller didn't identify themselves, so they had no idea who it was. So the cops ended up showing up. 5 seconds after the police officer getting out of the car, he's like, hey, what's going on? And then all of a sudden this girl charges out of nowhere, takes down another girl at the scene.
Yep.
And then turns and pushes up another girl against a car, and she has a knife and is trying to swing the knife when the cop shoots her 4 times.
Yeah. That's my understanding of the video too, and what I took from it.
Yeah. And people are demonizing this police officer,
some people, not all.
This isn't, not all, okay. Not all. It's not a blanket, but I got into so many arguments with my friends this week about it. 'Cause I'm like, if someone's trying to stab me, I want a cop to shoot them, they're using lethal force. I want lethal force used against them,
Well, and I tend to agree with you for what it's worth. I mean, to me, it's the same thing as the Toledo young man, the 12-year-old, right? That's running with a gun. May there have been a better way to handle it? Possibly, but you're looking at a split-second decision where the person is armed, right? And okay, maybe they're minors or maybe they're young adults, right? But when you play with adult weapons, when you play with adult toys, then the police have a right to respond with adult rules. I mean, if you're gonna win adult prizes, and I hate to put it that way, but this was a justified shooting, in my opinion. Now, the initial outrage so it happened like right before or right after the Chauvin verdict came down, if I remember correctly, and it was in Cincinnati, Ohio, right? And a bunch of people on Twitter, I'll use LeBron James as the most obvious example, tweeted out and said, "Oh shit, another shooting," right? And this is before everybody had had a chance to look at the footage and everything else. And I agree with that. In my opinion, at this point, we've seen enough unjustified shootings from police that the burden of proof is on them if they shoot somebody to prove that it was justified. I'm done giving them the benefit of the doubt, because if you look at the initial Chauvin paperwork that was released, right, it was basically, there's nothing to see here. The police have consistently covered for each other for far too long, and I'm fine with putting them under the same microscope that I would be. If I shot somebody in my front yard, it would be up to me to prove that it was a justified shooting. It wouldn't be assumed that I was correct. Once it comes out that I'm correct, like if I had footage from, my house that showed that this person was charging me with a knife and was within knife striking distance, then yeah, the police wouldn't prosecute me. And that's the way I view this, because I would think you and I would both agree that shooting an American citizen is like the last possible outcome that we want, short of somebody else hurting another American citizen.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't want any American to die, but I think that there are cases where, unfortunately you have to take a life to save a life,
Exactly.
Which this Ma'Khia Bryant situation, which I think is more open and shut than the Toledo one, like the 13-year-old kid.
I tend to agree with you. She was armed. It was obvious to see it. The knife is a weapon. She was within striking distance. If I remember right, she even had a hand on the person she was going to stab, but I may be wrong about that because I haven't reviewed it.
Yeah, she had her pinned against the car.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm sorry. I'm not going to give somebody with a knife a chance to stab somebody else because I don't want the cop to exercise deadly force. This is a case where exercising deadly force is a last resort and we're protecting the unarmed person. I have no problem with this. To go to Ricky the Great Ones, the problem was the strobe light. I tend to agree with you, but the cops are also responding in the Toledo case to a shots fired call. So I can understand them being at night unable to distinguish whether or not the weapon was dropped and whether or not it was, chambered or not. Again, I'm not saying it's the ideal outcome, but I do understand it, and police do have a right to defend themselves at some point. I do agree he shouldn't have had a strobe light, though. But for Ma'Khia Bryant, yeah, I think she's armed, and she's attacking another unarmed American citizen. And this is what we have the police for, is, to stop this, right? And they didn't really have a chance. And I'm not going to argue that they should put away their weapon and break out a one-fire taser and hope that it hits and that they're at the right distance and all this kind of stuff and risk the other unarmed person's life. No, that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, no, I mean, we agree on this, but it was just, I was like enraged, talking to these people, because I'm like, the cop I timed it. He had between 10 and 12 seconds to discern that whole thing from arriving on site till shots fired. Mm-hmm. Like 10 to 12 seconds, that's it. Mm-hmm. To diagnose that whole situation is just, it's insane.
Well, it's not even diagnose the whole situation, it's stop the whole situation, right? Because you've got somebody that's got their hand on somebody with a knife getting ready to stab them, from your point of view, right? And you've got to stop this before the person gets stabbed. If the person with the knife ain't listening, I mean, I don't know what to tell you at that point. I understand this one entirely, but I also understand the initial outrage that says, hey, somebody else got shot, another black citizen got shot, and it was the person that called in the 911 call. Like I said, in my opinion, at this point, police need to prove that the shooting was justified. For BLM, just very, very briefly, I want body cameras on all officers. I want the footage to be released upon demand. It can't be, handled internally and they don't just get to review it and not release it to everybody else to review. I want outside investigation from whether it's a federal agency or whatever the case is. I want it investigated outside, and I want it prosecuted from outside. I would also prefer the trials to be removed from those jurisdictions. That would be my ideal solution to solving this. I think we've seen too many cases where that, blue wall of silence stops justice.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, I think that there's reasonable, things that we can do to, like body cams, yeah, 100%. More mental health checks for the police, especially these city police that see more gruesome things more often than, suburban police. Like there's reasonable things that can be done that would help mitigate what we're dealing with. More high intensity training, like where you actually get your adrenaline pumping in training. So this way you can, figure out how you're going to react under these situations and try to hone that in. So when you're in that situation in the real world, instead of just, these like low intensity, like, hey, let's, look, that guy's on top of that. You know what I mean? Like you're not actually in the scenario.
Well, I don't think we need more training for police. I think we need different training for police. I think police are trained too much on firearms and their use, and that's like their almost first go-to anymore, and they should be trained more on de-escalation stuff. So I would be fine with moving the money from firearms training to de-escalation in a lot of senses. I would be fine with moving the money for buying MRAPs, mine-resistant anti-personnel vehicles, basically up-armored vehicles that are, meant to roll over landmines. I'd be fine with taking the money used for that kind of stuff and moving it to de-escalation training. And I would also be fine with, the vast majority of non-violent stuff, traffic stops, being taken out of the hands of armed responders. I don't need an armed person to pull over somebody and give them a ticket any more than I need an armed person to write a parking ticket.
Well, like, I guess my pushback with like the traffic stop thing was, did you see that, what was it? I think it was in Texas. Was it in Texas or New Mexico? I don't remember which one it was. But a cop pulled over a motorist, right? And like he knew the motorist was armed and asked if he could take the gun. The guy ends up getting out of the car and the cop's still being respectful. And then he starts shooting at the cop. The cop gets taken down and then walked over and executes the cop. That's one reason why I think with the amount of guns we have in our country, I think it's warranted to have at least one armed officer per traffic stop.
See, where we're communicating past each other, and I might not have seen that specific video, but I think I have, where we're communicating past each other is a meter maid can't arrest you, right? They can write you a parking ticket, but they can't throw you on the hood of the car and say, hey, you have outstanding warrants, I'm dragging you in. So nobody is executing the meter maid, right? They're not executing the person writing you parking tickets. If I make a different service that writes traffic tickets, right? Nobody's executing that person if they can't throw them in jail. Nobody's going around executing, traffic stoplights, right? The red light cameras. Actually, I think there was a dude in Louisiana that shot him with BB guns, but that's just because he didn't want tickets, right? But nobody's, if you just put a parking, if you took meter maids and gave them cars and they enforce speed limits, nobody's executing that person. Because, okay, if I've got a kilo in the trunk, right, but this person ain't searching my car and ain't arresting me, why am I going to shoot him? Give me my ticket. I'll pay it, later. That's cool. And I'm going to keep going. So that person at that point doesn't need to be armed.
So my pushback on that would be is when they run the license plate and whatnot, or the driver's license, and find out that the person has warrants, well,
then call the fucking police at that point.
Okay, but
so I can
pulled over.
I can flash this person, right? Or I can run the plates while I'm following them, right? And say, oh, this car is registered to somebody that has outstanding warrants. And then I'm fine with, having an armed response at that point. If you want them to follow them or whatever the case is, I could see that. But Like Lieutenant Nazario getting pulled over with weapons drawn for a, license plate that they couldn't see in the window. That's ridiculous. There's no need for it. We could have pulled that guy over and wrote him a ticket without having to have weapons involved at all.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I did hear some conflicting information with that case in particular. I don't think that he should have weapons drawn on him, but apparently he drove like a mile and a half down the road to get to a lighted,
with his hazard lights on.
Area. Yeah.
Which I have done personally when I was in the state of Texas.
I've done it too.
Yeah. Did they come up to your window with weapons drawn?
No. Like I'm not defending the weapons drawn.
Okay. Just making sure, because I mean, I was taught by the chief of police, or I was told by the chief of police in the city I grew up in, because I grew up in a small town, to a single mother. So the chief of police kind of knew everybody and took an interest in a single mother with two young boys to make sure the boys, kind of had a male role model to a certain extent. Right. And he specifically told me, when I started driving, if there's not a shoulder or something to pull over on and you get lit up, just, turn on your hazards and drive to a safe exit or whatever. So that way everybody's safe. Right.
Yeah.
I don't blame a black man in this country for driving to a lit area when he gets pulled over. I don't, not at all.
Well, no, I don't blame anyone for doing that. But at the same time, when they were giving him commands, he wasn't complying.
Well, they gave him two separate commands, which were conflictory, because we went over this last episode, right? They said, keep your hands out of the window and get out of the car. And the dude was buckled in. Which one do I follow?
Yeah,
because I can't do this and do this to undo my seatbelt, right? That's physically impossible. So which one gets me shot?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to die on that hill.
Okay,
you know what I mean?
Just making sure.
No, I'm not going to, I don't like that happened, but, there is another side that, I don't completely agree with, but I can kind of see.
I don't see it at all. I really don't. I can see pulling the guy over, right? I can see being cautious, maybe having one officer come around to the side and one stay at the car. I don't see a need for weapons, right? And when the man identifies himself as a United States Army officer and the police officer gets even with him and can see that he's fucking in uniform, right? And not armed, right? At this point, this guy gets the benefit of the doubt, in my opinion. I mean, And that's ignoring the fact that the cop made multiple threats. You're going to ride the lightning, right? And Lieutenant Nazario said, hey, I'm scared. And he said, you should be, right? Fuck that dude. That dude should not be an officer at all. That dude should not be in a police uniform, period, full stop.
No, I mean, like I said, I'm not going to die on that hill.
Well, I don't see the counter argument to it that you're saying you see both sides on. Right? Because you and I have both been pulled over and turned on our hazards and driven to a safe spot.
Yeah. So police are in a heightened state as well in this country, not just black men as well. They've been demonized over the last year, by both sides. The right hates them for enforcing lockdowns, and the left hates them for, the BLM stuff, right? So the cops know everyone hates them. So a lot of cops are aware of this and are also in a heightened state, which, right or wrong, it makes sense to me,
that because I know a lot of Americans don't like me, I should go up to every American's car with a drawn weapon.
I'm not defending the drawn weapon.
Okay. So what part of this particular interaction exactly are you defending? Because when I ask you the specifics of the interaction, you're like, well, not that part. I've done this part. I guess that's what I'm missing. I understand you don't agree with the whole overall thing, but what specific part are you defending?
The commands part in the beginning were pretty clear.
No, he was told to keep his hands out of the window and get out of the car. How's he supposed to do that?
Until the second officer started talking. You know, like once the second officer started saying commands, then, you know, it was conflicting. So if the officers need to do better with like one person give commands, you know, that's what it should be. But, you know, in the beginning, it kind of was that. And then the other officers started chiming in when he wasn't complying. And I don't know, you know.
I mean, I guess I just don't see what this Army officer was supposed to do. I mean, if I'm told to keep my hands out of the car and then I'm told to get out of the car and I'm wearing a seatbelt, I literally cannot do that. And we've seen countless videos of, you know, Philandro Castile, you know, reaching for his identification after being specifically told to get it and getting shot. Right? I don't blame the man for keeping his hands out the window. It was probably the safest fucking thing he could have done, especially with the way those two officers were acting.
Yeah, but his one hand wasn't out the window.
No, they were both out the window.
I'm pretty sure from the officer's body cam footage, the one wasn't in for a while.
That's not what we saw last week. I mean, I can bring it back up again if you want to watch it again.
Well, I can't watch the stream because I'm on my phone, and I watch the stream on my phone.
Oh, gotcha. But I mean, he had both of his hands. He had both of his hands sitting on the window the entire time until he was, you know, after he'd been pepper sprayed and was blind, right, and tried to like get out of the car with his seatbelt still on and asked the officers to remove his seatbelt because he was scared, which I completely understand at this point. Because like I said, that first officer, the primary officer on the scene, was the one threatening. It just seems like to me at a basic level, right, that the police officer should be the one that is most in control of themselves and is most professional. And in that entire engagement between those three men, Lieutenant Nazario was the most calm and the most composed and the most professional. The police officers signed up for the job. Lieutenant Nazario didn't sign up to get pulled over. Why is he the calmest and most professional one in the whole damn thing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to die on that hill.
Okay, fair enough.
But
like I said, Micaiah Bryant, I understand. I completely agree. Toledo, I can see both sides of this one. The officer shouldn't have been using a strobe light. Maybe if he'd been using a regular flashlight, he could have seen the situation better. But I understand with the equipment that was involved, I can see the justification for the shooting, right? I see no justification for the Nazario stop, the way it was handled. If you want to pull the guy over because you can't see his license plate, completely understand. If you want to get out of the car and, you know, like I said, play it safe without having to draw weapons, completely understand. I see no justification for, you know, drawing weapons, right? I see no justification for threatening the man twice, especially when he admits he's scared at the beginning of the interaction, right? I see no justification for demanding the man get out of his car in the first fucking place. I've been pulled over a lot of times. I've been asked to get out of my car one time, right? And that's because I was being a jackass to the officer, because he was being a jackass to start with me. So I knew what I was signing up for, right? I just don't see a way. I don't see any justification for how this went down from the police point of view. I really don't.
Well, yeah, I'm not trying to blanketly justify the whole thing. I'm trying to, you know, pick pieces out that kind of make sense. But in totality, I don't agree with the situation, if that makes sense.
It does, and it seems like the only thing that you want to point to that you're willing to actually say makes sense is that he wasn't following orders. But like I said, he got conflicting orders, and you agreed with that from the time that both officers started talking, which was like, what, 5-10 seconds into the initial encounter?
Something like that. Yeah. But, you know, like...
So if the police officer from Micaiah Bryant has 14 seconds to decide whether to shoot a man or not, I think it's okay to give the civilian 10 seconds to figure out, you know, which command he's supposed to follow. And within 10 seconds, by your own admission, he's already getting conflicting commands.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, 10 seconds to put your hands outside the window.
Which he did.
You know, I think that's plenty of time.
He did.
Well,
his hands were outside the window from like the minute he was stopped.
From the officer's angle of the body cam footage, you could only see one.
From one officer's angle, but from the other officer's angle, the one that was threatening him, that was coming around the side of the car, you could see too.
All right, like I'm not defending this one.
That's fair enough, and this is why I said it. I don't understand conservatives' urge to like leap to the defense of the police in situations where it's like blatantly fucked up, right? Why can't we just do just like we did with Chauvin, right? This guy did something that was completely wrong, completely out of policy, and shouldn't have been handled that way. And then do the same thing with this officer that stopped Lieutenant Nazario. This guy did something that was completely wrong, completely out of hand, and should be prosecuted for it. Should be kicked off the force and shouldn't be allowed to work as a police officer ever, anywhere again, period. I'm not saying we need to disband all police, right? But I don't understand the urge to like jump to why this guy that's threatening a service member that, you know, is getting pulled over for a license plate that they couldn't see, that he had, right? But that they just couldn't see through the window, right? I don't understand the justification for jumping to this man's defense in any way or regard.
I think it points to the broader issue with demonizing the police, which is why conservatives are so quick to come to the defense.
But you understand that from the outside, that makes it more likely for people to demonize the police. Because if we can't even get rid of the bad ones, where, you know, you and I in a vacuum should agree that this behavior was egregious and unprofessional and out of line. If we can't get rid of those guys, well, then fuck the whole thing. Let's get rid of it. That's where you're seeing all the abolish the police and all cops are bastards shit come from. Because if the police had gotten rid of that guy, nobody would have had a problem during this stop, right? If the police had gotten rid of Derek Chauvin ages ago, George Floyd would still be alive, and you wouldn't have a Black Lives Matter 26 million, American protest across the country. You're feeding the problem.
I mean, while I can agree with you, I think that there is, at this point, there's definitely a police shortage in like the major cities across the country, which is an issue because people don't want to be cops at this point because of the way they've been treated over the last year. And people don't, and it's a tough job,
I agree that it's a tough job.
People just don't want to be cops.
I agree that it's a tough job.
They don't make enough money.
But any cop that doesn't want to be a cop because of the Derek Chauvin verdict, or any cop that doesn't want to be a cop because they can't act like that guy did during the Lieutenant Nazario stop, I don't want them as police anyway.
No, but that's not like the cop from Columbus has been getting shit. The cop from the Adam Toledo shooting's been getting shit. And it's like, but if they're doing like lawful, like if what they're doing is justified and within their training, they shouldn't be catching shit. And they're so under a microscope right now that it's every little thing, it's.
So they're under a microscope when they commit. So they're under a microscope when they commit use of force, right? And I think that should be under a microscope because use of force should be a last resort. It's the same as if you were in, Iraq or Afghanistan as an infantry soldier or as an army soldier, right? Use of force is the last resort. You have to justify it. You don't just get to shoot somebody because they're carrying a gun.
Of course, but even if they are justified in the shooting, they're still getting attacked by, not one half, but like one side of the political spectrum.
I agree with that. And like I said, by defending or trying to leap to the defense of every officer, even when you admit they're in the wrong, right? You are feeding that side, because that side would get a whole lot less vocal. There would be a whole lot less members that were, or a whole lot less people that were members of that side, of the abolish the police side, if the police had a whole lot less instances of, illegal use of force. I think you and I both agree that if, Chauvin had been removed from the police force in Minneapolis before he murdered George Floyd, that there wouldn't have been 26 million people protesting across America for Black Lives Matter, and the police wouldn't feel as threatened as a result.
No, I agree with that, but I don't think that it's right to say that because of the verdict of the Chauvin trial, that's why police feel the way they do.
You're going to have to clarify a little bit there for me, because the argument you were making about it, just to clarify my own thought process, the argument you were making about police not wanting, or people not wanting to be police because they're under a microscope after the Chauvin trial or after BLM, right, is the same argument that conservative Ben Shapiro and Tucker Carlson and Steven Crowder and that crowd is making, right? And they started making this argument immediately after Chauvin was convicted and when the trial was starting. And anybody that doesn't want to be a police officer because of the fact that, Chauvin was convicted of murder, I don't want as a police officer in the first place.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think that that's why. See, while the mainstream conservatives might be pointing to that as the reason why, I think that you could point to, like, just dealing with riots constantly. And, if you are justified in a shooting, then you're still being demonized by the left, who controls the media narrative, or, it's just like, I don't think because of the Chauvin trial, yes, obviously, like, hindsight, like, yeah, it would have been great if the police would have gotten rid of Chauvin before that happened, and then we wouldn't be going through this.
Yes, and my point is,
I don't think.
Let me pause you. So my point is, had people not let to the defense of Chauvin, because he was charged with this, or people pointed out his problems because he'd knelt on a teenager's neck before this. If the police had come forward, if the conservatives hadn't, all police are, by default assumed innocent, right? If he'd have been convicted or kicked off the force because he wasn't following policy back then, you wouldn't have the BLM riots that resulted from George Floyd's murder. You wouldn't have, to use your logic, the police feeling, insecure because they're dealing with nothing but riots, right? My fault is, why do you keep leaping to the defense? Why do conservatives keep leaping to the defense of all officers, even when they disagree, or even when they agree with me that the stop was completely unjustified in the way it was handled? Why can't I get rid of these guys before they murder somebody?
Well, I think that you should be able to. I think that it should be easier to fire a police officer than it currently is.
And keep them from getting employed somewhere else as a police officer?
Yeah. I think that there should be a database with, like, a federal database, or even a state database, whatever database you want to do, whether it be federal or state, of recorded of all the instances of, like, legitimate instances of excessive use of force.
I tend to agree with you on that one. Let me pause you for a second. Rack, welcome in. I'm going to get to chat in a second. Curtis Bergeron, welcome in. As soon as the call is complete, I'll get to chat, or you're more than welcome to call in. There's 4 open lines. Numbers toll free right down there. I agree with you on the database, by the way, or I could see a free market solution of they have to carry their own version of malpractice insurance. And if they, just keep committing stuff that would go against that insurance policy, then they would become uninsurable.
Yeah, but then that's one step towards the privatization of police, right?
I could see it, right? Because you could have medical doctors carry malpractice insurance like they currently do, but still socialize medicine.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really like that as a solution. I'd rather just have like a federal database, you know.
That would be my preferred solution too.
Because they are still employees of the state, you know, so they should be covered by the state or the town or the locality where they're, you know, where they're serving.
I think personally, if you just tied it to the police department budget or tied it to the police pension fund, right, you'd see cops start kicking the problem children out of their forces a whole lot quicker. Right now, the problem is if I commit a crime as a police officer, the city pays for it, so there's no detractor for the blue wall of silence.
No, I mean I can understand that. Like I think we're both in agreement that there does need to be some, you know, changes in the police force.
Yes,
but
massive in my opinion.
I think with like the demonization of the police department in general, though, is not healthy for society, as you know, less and less people want to become cops, which leads to policing shortages in big cities, you know, like Philadelphia being one of them. There was just an article that came out the other day saying there are hundreds of officers short, and the next class won't be on the streets until spring 2022.
Which, if you follow the BLM logic of defund the police and move a lot of this money to another service, like traffic ticket writers, like we discussed, or like social workers to go and do wellness checks, right, then it would be irrelevant because I don't need as many police. You're viewing, so police in this country do a lot of catch-all jobs that, in my opinion, do not need an armed person to do. I don't need an armed person to write traffic tickets any more than I need an armed person to write, you know, parking tickets. I don't need an armed person to go knock on a door and make sure grandma didn't break her leg and can't get up, right? So I don't see the need for all the officers that you do.
Yeah, see, like, I think growing up, like, right outside of Philadelphia, like, I'm in the burbs. You know, so like I get all the Philly news and whatnot, right? And I think that with how violent of a city Philadelphia is, at this point, like being short on officers is only going to cause Philadelphia to be more violent. Whereas I think you need to address these issues, like I think we need to have the correct amount of police, and we need to address the societal issues in those neighborhoods. You know?
I can see that.
At the same time, which is going to cost more money, but at the same time, I think it'll solve the issue. And then once you fix the societal issues, you know, once the societal issues become better, you know, then you can start, you know, as officers retire, they might not need to be replaced.
Well, I don't see that it's as bad as you're making it out to be. I mean, violent crime, murder, and non-negligent manslaughter rates in the United States have been declining since 1995. I'm looking at the graph right now. I know you're on your phone, right? But then the numbers have been going down since like the 1700s per capita. I mean, violent crime is less and less. And you're telling me when, you know, well, when violent crime goes down, that's when we can have less police officers. Well, it is, and we're adding more.
Well, the violent crime in Philadelphia is actually skyrocketing this year. It's quite a bit higher than in years past, as far as like murders are concerned and shootings, you know.
I can understand making an exception for the pandemic year, right? People under undue stress and people living with each other cooped up in tight spaces when they normally wouldn't be, and that sort of stuff. But I mean, just overall, the numbers in the United States have been going down since the 90s. Police haven't. Funding for police hasn't.
No, I agree with you, but what I'm advocating for is like what I see is the most feasible solution, you know, that I see, you know, that is pretty practical, but we just have to make sure we have to hold people, like the politicians, to actually following through with that.
So if I took, hypothetically here, okay, we'll keep the cops the same for this hypothetical, and I said, hey, you guys don't have to do traffic stops anymore. You guys don't have to do wellness checks anymore. You're just going to focus on violent crime where an armed response is necessary. You still think at that point I need to add more officers? I mean, they're doing a whole lot less.
See, I think that's where we have like I think you need one armed officer per incident.
You're going to have to define incidents. Yeah, you're going to have to define incident. I need one armed officer per speeding incident?
Yes.
Okay, how is speeding any different than parking in the wrong location? Couldn't I say I need one armed officer for parking in the wrong location?
I mean, you could, sure.
So how are these two different?
So the difference is, a lot of times with parking enforcement, the person isn't actually at the vehicle. So you're not having a direct in-person encounter with said individual. Yes, it does happen, but they're few and far between.
Okay, so where I have an in-person interaction to try and make these things equal, you're saying I should have that officer, that meter maid, be armed?
I mean, then they could call the police if it escalates.
Couldn't you do that for a traffic stop too?
I mean, you could. I just don't. I've seen, too many instances where, the individual turns violent,
I agree with you, but we don't. So why do we see instances in traffic stops where people turn violent, and we don't see this massive instance in parking violations where people turn violent? Again, excluding the ones where people aren't at the car. We've got individuals at the car in both instances, right? You're saying traffic stops turn violent, so those officers need to be armed, but meter maid instances don't turn violent, so they don't need to be armed. My question is why? Why does one turn violent and the other doesn't?
Because I feel like a lot of meter maid, tickets and whatnot, they don't run the driver's license of the individual. They will run the plate.
Yeah.
And they will boot it.
Yeah.
But they're not running the driver's license for warrants. And if they do run the plate and there is a warrant, then they call the police for it.
Okay, so why couldn't the traffic stop be the same way? Because I feel like you're dancing around saying the meter maid can't arrest the guy.
No, I think that's a convenient answer for your argument.
I think it's an honest answer for my argument. If the meter maid can't arrest me, I really don't give a shit, and I don't need to shoot him in the head if I'm, the drug dealer or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, like your argument, it does hold water. You know what I mean? Like it does make sense. But typically when you're issuing a parking ticket, the person is not behind the wheel of the vehicle, which poses a danger.
So the 1 foot that it takes me to like turn my key and hop in the car is the distinguishing on whether I need an armed officer or not for you? I don't think you even believe that.
I mean, I just fundamentally think that we need an armed officer on these traffic stops.
I don't. I think the armed officer is what is causing these situations to become violent. I don't have an armed officer with meter maids. They're still running the plates the same as the officer is for the traffic stop. One turns violent a lot more often than the other one does. I don't see anybody, like you said, trying to run over meter maids or trying to shoot meter maids or execute meter maids, etc. I think the armed officer is the threat. The vast, vast, vast majority, I think you would agree with me, of speeding tickets or traffic violations do not require an armed response. And the ones that seem to always show up after they run the plate and the officer tries to make the arrest at that point. Okay, well, if, I've got my traffic people like meter maids that can't write or that can't arrest people, if they run the plate while they're following the car and want to call an armed officer to that because they see the guy has warrants or whatever, I'm fine with that. But I don't see why I need 99% of traffic stops being armed. I don't see anything close to that.
I mean, I think we're just going to agree to disagree. I think that you do make a valid point with, your meter maid issue, your meter maid argument. But I've personally seen too many times where, cop gets shot dead.
I agree. And I'm not saying that police shouldn't be armed. I'm saying that this is a job they don't need to do, which would remove the violence from the job. And then my armed officer that's not sitting on the side of the road, pulling people over, where I don't need an armed officer, he can be responding to, actual violent crime that you and I both want to get rid of.
Yeah,
I mean, we're doing this already we're doing it already with red light cams, right? You used to have an armed officer sitting at the red light that would, pull people over, and now we do it with a camera. I don't see a fundamental difference, but I'll quit pushing you on it.
I wasn't prepared for that one. You got me good on that one. I'll give you that.
It's not about getting you, man. That's one of the things I like about when you call in is, you're able to engage in hypotheticals and you'll concede, okay, that makes sense, or okay, that doesn't make sense. And it's always an enjoyable conversation with you. Anything else to add? I need to get back to chat real quick because Rec just dropped me something that I need to look at.
Yeah, man, no worries. I'm good. Get back to chat.
I appreciate it, my man. Thank you for calling in as always. You're more than welcome, and I appreciate you being here for the entire stream. I greatly appreciate it. And like, share, get other people in here that agree with you. The more ideas we have, the better.
Well, I'm a lone centrist, so everyone hates me, so it's cool.
We've moved you from identifying as a conservative the first time you called in to being a centrist now, so I'll take it.
Well, no, everyone, I've always been a centrist, but, to online lefties, I just tell them I'm a conservative because they'll hate me anyway.
Well, I don't hate you, man. Thank you again. I appreciate it, and I'll probably talk to you next week.
All right, brother. Sounds good. Take it easy.
You too. That was Hardwood and Sock. As always, the number down there is toll free. You can call in if you've got any questions, disagreements. Anybody who disagrees always gets priority. Repeat caller, I think we're up to call number 4 now. It may be number 3, but great guy and always an enjoyable conversation. Rack, let me look at what you've got. Okay, so the tweet you are drawing is from Bo of the 5th column. Simple idea, have a sensor in the holster that reports every time the pistol is drawn. It automatically calls for backup, and the cop has to explain in writing why they drew their weapon. This should reduce drawing the pistol and therefore encourage use of less lethal options. Bo and I are very much on the same track regarding a lot of things with Second Amendment rights and police use of force. Bo is basically advocating the same thing that I did, where he's saying that the police need to justify use of force. The default assumption that the police are always justified has shifted to now they need to justify their use of force. Personally, I would be okay with that in terms of having a sensor in the holster. I would also mandate body cams. I would mandate the release of the footage, period. I don't want only the police investigating and saying, hey, this footage is fine, there's nothing to see here. I want outside prosecution an outside investigation. I don't want the DA that has to work with those local city police and has to rely his entire career on that local city department investigating that department. I want it investigated by somebody outside with no ties to them, and I want it prosecuted by somebody outside with no ties to that agency. And yes, there is a massive police shortage. Curtis Bergeron earlier, who am I to question the actions of trained officers? I'm a tax-paying American citizen who is a former infantry officer in the United States Army. Is that simple enough for you? Regarding Chauvin specifically, if you were, because I think you commented during that part of the conversation, his own chief of police and his own training instructors said that that was not department policy. That was not the way he had been trained. So even they were saying he was out of line. But if you weren't referring to that part specifically, I'll retract that line. From Hardwood and Sock, we can all question their actions, but if we don't get the answer we like or agree, then we need to accept it, both sides. Somewhat I agree. Just following orders and just following procedure isn't a valid defense, and that's been decided since like the Nuremberg trials of the Nazis in Germany. So I don't care if your departmental policy says that you can draw your weapon and shoot somebody at a traffic stop just because their windows are tinted too darkly. Even if the departmental policy said something that ridiculous, if the officer did it, they're still guilty of murder, in my opinion, or attempted murder if they didn't actually kill the driver, right? Just following orders is not a valid legal defense. Just following policy isn't a valid legal defense. If we find these policies in different departments, should we get them corrected? Absolutely. Don't mistake me. But at some point, to go to my old conservative roots, personal responsibility comes into play. And as an officer, you should know better. Even if your policy says that you can, beat somebody to death, that's not what you get to do. Curtis Bergeron, that's not what was said during the trial. Then you need to go rewatch it. The Minnesota chief of police specifically said that's not what he was trained to do. And Ricky, if you're still in the stream, I know you watched the whole thing. I watched a lot of it with you. If you could pull up that clip and shoot it to me, greatly appreciate it. From Hardwood and Sock, yes, of course, but I'm talking about if it comes out that the Ma'Khia Bryant shooting was justified, then the left needs to accept it. I think you should be able to look at the video of that one and see that another unarmed citizen was under threat and that the Ma'Khia Bryant shooting, while not optimal, right? It's not the outcome anybody wants, left, right, or center. It was justified. I agree with you. Oh, Ricky's already live? Damn. Oh, good luck to Ricky. We love Ricky around here. Just like the right needs to accept Chauvin acted beyond his means. Chauvin acted outside of departmental policy, and even if his policy, which it did not, but even if his the departmental policy was you could kneel on the neck of a man for 9.5 minutes, including 2.5 minutes after he quit being responsive, he should have still been convicted. Yes, I agree with you. I think both of those situations are one side or the other just playing, go team instead of actually looking at the reality of the situation. And I've said countless times before, and I will continue to say it, you don't need to let ideology stand in the way of fucking reality. Well, thank you. I appreciate the fact that you agree. But Curtis, you're more than welcome to provide a link if you think that that's not what was said during the trial. I don't have the time to look it up specifically here on stream, but if you want to drop a link, you've got permission. And I think we're going to take another 5-minute break, everybody, and then we'll come back and see if we've got enough traffic and conversation to continue. That's why the righties hate you too. I think this country has a very serious problem with people putting team over reality. I think it's a lot more obvious on the Republican side right now. Are there some far left that do it? Sure, absolutely. But I think you see it a lot more on the right now. But we can have that discussion when I get back. 5-minute break, and we'll catch you after the break. The time for silence is over. There was once an unprecedented time in American history when common citizens of their day began to define the rights of man and documented how those rights were being violated by their current government. They wrote to each other. They debated with each other. Ultimately, it was these common citizens who recorded these rights for all eternity, and furthermore created a new and free nation founded on these rights with liberty and justice for all of its citizens. Times have changed, but these rights remain.
I don't take responsibility.
That all citizens have the right to life. That all citizens have the right to pursue happiness. That all citizens are created equal. That all citizens have the right to a public trial. That all citizens have the right to peacefully assemble. That all citizens have the right to petition their government. What happens when you try to exercise these rights today? Is this government honoring your rights? Or are they violating them? Is this the government that those citizens aspired to? There is a solution.
I don't take responsibility. I don't take responsibility. I don't take responsibility.
Join me every Sunday afternoon for a new show where common citizens, you and I together, discuss with each other issues of today, where we demand proof and evidence is required, where we seek the truth and will not be silent. Join me this coming Sunday afternoon and take part in America's oldest and most honored tradition. Welcome back, everybody. I greatly appreciate you being here, and thank you for sticking with me through the break as always. Bring chat back into it. Raphael, welcome. Appreciate it. Curtis Bergeron was the last comment. Chauvin was high on a combination of fentanyl and methamphetamine. Would not stay in the police car. Fought with 4 police officers. I think fought is a very generous definition of what occurred. Furthermore, he was handcuffed and in the police car when Chauvin pulled him out of the car and put him on the pavement. So we pulled him back out of the car. Then we know he was unresponsive for 2 minutes. And the prosecution in that case brought multiple medical experts that pointed out that fentanyl isn't what caused his death. Nor was it methamphetamine. And after he had been unresponsive for, I believe it was 2 minutes, with Officer Chauvin having his hands in his pockets while kneeling on Mr. Floyd's neck, I think any reasonable person does not think that Mr. Floyd is a threat to the officer's safety at that point, even if you wanted to make the threat, even if you wanted to make the assertion that he was a threat to their safety when he was already in handcuffs in the police car. Ancient literature dude, hey, thank you. Welcome in. Anybody who's into ancient languages and reading, go check out Ancient Literature Dude's stream or YouTube channel. Excellent job. Curtis Bergeron, he had 3 times the lethal dose with 98% O2 stats. My understanding is he actually had 4 times the lethal dose. However, as the medical experts pointed out, that would be for somebody who did not have a tolerance to fentanyl. And just like anything else, I'll use alcohol since most people will be familiar with alcohol. If you are a consistent user of a substance, you build up a tolerance to said substance. So 4 times the lethal dose of alcohol for you, or for me, I'll use me since I know I'm not a hard drinker, is not going to be the same as somebody who drinks a handle of vodka every day. And then the medical experts who testified, the pulmonologist and the coroner who did the autopsy, both pointed out that he would have been alive had it not been for Officer Chauvin kneeling on his neck. From Dash Mickey, Curtis Bergeron jumps on that. He was holding him down in a controlled position until medics arrived. And departmental policy was, after you secured control, that you moved him to a side recovery position, as stated by the chief of police for that department and Officer Chauvin's training officer. Once you have the suspect under control, which again, for the last 2 minutes, Mr. Floyd was completely unresponsive. And obviously, Officer Chauvin felt that he had him in control if he was comfortable enough to stick his own hands in his pockets. Because if I feel a threat to my safety, I'm not walking around with my hands in my pockets. Hell, even my 5-year-old won't stick his hands in his pockets if he thinks somebody's going to take a swing at him. It's time to move Mr. Floyd to a side recovery position per departmental policy. From Dash Mickey, I just want the police to be more aware of the characteristics of the people they bring in. Almost every situation includes some hothead who abuses their authority. We need to get people who will be calm and understanding in a situation and stay within the law, not those who make a 2-second decision to shoot a 12-year-old. I'll disagree with you on the Toledo case. If I think a 12-year-old or however-year-old is turning towards me with an armed weapon, I would fire back. In general, I agree with you. The officer should be the most calm and most professional in any given interaction with a civilian. Hardwood and Sock, you can't see his messages. That's because Curtis is coming in from YouTube. If you watch the stream itself, the chat, you will see his messages show up. But I know you're on mobile, so it'll be harder for you to see his messages. You might have to blow it up and come back down. But he's coming in from YouTube. Rack 0716, even then the EMTs testified that they arrived approximately after 4 minutes of him kneeling and Floyd was already passed out. So what about the remainder of the 9 minutes? Yeah, it was excessive. And like I said at the beginning, he was already in the car and they pulled him back out. I thought the whole point was to get him in the car, in control, but okay. Curtis Bergeron, counterfeit bills, resisting arrest. Sorry, dude, collateral damage. You have a constitutional right to a public trial. I'm sorry, the Constitution does not allow the police to execute somebody on the side of the street for a counterfeit bill. That thing that we all live under in this country trumps any opinion you might have about the punishment Mr. Floyd should have received. I would argue that execution for $20 would be a bit fucking absurd. But hey, even if that's your position, he still has a constitutional right to a public trial. And by public trial, I don't mean he can be executed in public by an officer kneeling on his neck. I think we should give you all what you want. Take the police out of blue areas. We'll see how well that works out. I would agree with you that some people on the left want to remove all police from all cities. I think those people are ridiculous. I think you were here for the conversation with Hardwood and Sock. I'm fine with defunding the police. I don't want to abolish the police. Those are two different positions. I think people like you that are defending obvious police misconduct and brutality are giving fuel to the fire of the people that want to abolish all policing. I think police are doing a lot of jobs right now that do not merit armed responses. And I would be fine with taking some money from the police department and moving it to like Department of Health and Human Services. So a social worker or an EMT can go do a wellness check on your grandmother. If you call 911 and say, hey, I haven't heard from my grandmother in a week or 3 days, and she's not answering the phone, can somebody go check on the house and make sure she's okay? I don't need to send somebody with a gun to see if your grandmother fell down the stairs. And I would be fine with the guy that has the gun, the police officer, not having to do that, so they had more time to, actually go investigate violent crime. But I think that by always jumping to the defense of these situations that are clearly indefensible, you're not helping your case of wanting to support police. Ancient literature dude, sorry if you've already addressed this, but what do you think are the key similarities and differences between the George Floyd case and the death of Ma'Khia Bryant? We already did discuss it, but you are more than welcome to ask any question. We're kind of, initially the way I run the show is I'll present my case on whatever the topic is, right? So in this case, we did DC Statehood. And then any phone calls that come in or anything from chat that comes in is more than welcome to address anything from this episode or the previous episode. Previous episode did Black Lives Matter, so it doesn't matter whether you ask a question that's already been addressed or not. That's what I'm here for. For me, the key difference is Ma'Khia Bryant was armed. She had her hand on the person that was being threatened, and she was armed, right? George Floyd was handcuffed on the ground and well within police control. Now, the initial outrage or the initial questioning that came forward about the Ma'Khia Bryant situation, she was shot, was holy shit, another black person just got shot, and I believe it was Cincinnati, Ohio. Why is this still happening? And then most, when they saw the body cam footage and the footage of the incident and realized that it was bam, bam, and Ma'Khia had been armed and somebody else was being threatened, most people, left, right, and center, said, well, this isn't the outcome we want, but it makes sense. It's justified in this case. And I am fine with that. I think that's the way that it should go. I think if you have to use deadly force, that the justification, the burden of proof to prove that you had to use deadly force should be on whoever used the force. If I shoot somebody in my front yard, it's going to be up to me to prove that it was justified self-defense. And I think we've seen enough instances at this point of police officers standing behind that blue wall of silence that they don't get the benefit of the doubt anymore than an average American citizen does at this point. Am I fine with them still being armed? Yes. Am I fine with them having to use force in certain instances where it's justified? Yes. Do I think they need to justify it when they use force? Absolutely. Curtis Bergeron, what if she's being held hostage? I'm not sure what you're referring to. Had to do this numerous times, and I don't support police. I think they are tyrannical. Therefore, so is any form of government which infringes the rights of Americans. Okay. I don't think that they're necessarily tyrannical, but I do think in a lot of instances they're being used in situations where they shouldn't be. And there's a lot of bullshit laws they're having to enforce that shouldn't be laws. I think we need to address the laws. From Rack, an example of how Sweden handles mental health situations. I'll check that after the stream and bring it up. I did point out multiple instances last episode that was fully on BLM, European versus American policing. The short version is there's a lot of cases in Europe where somebody will walk out alive, the suspect, and in America that does not happen. And I believe it's 25% of deaths in this country by police are experiencing some form of mental health crisis. So yes, we could do a lot more in the mental health care department. It's one of the reasons I'm hugely in favor of Medicare for all, or some form of universal health care. Rusky 5150. Hey, I don't think I've seen you in here before. Welcome to the stream. I greatly appreciate you dropping by. What do the left speak about? In this particular instance, we're talking about DC statehood, which I am in favor of because I've been unable to find a good argument against it. We're also talking about last week's episode regarding BLM and policing in the United States of America. I've seen you before? Oh, well, welcome back. I appreciate it. There's quite a few names. For anybody who's not already, feel free to like, follow, subscribe, hit the bell. It doesn't mean you agree with my political views, but it means you do enjoy the conversation and that you want to follow it and be a part of it in the future. Again, if you can present better evidence and arguments than the position I am currently holding, I will gladly change my views. I used to be conservative, and that's exactly how I ended up where I am now. Other than an imbalance of power. You got to clarify, Rusky. From Curtis again, the media still tried to push the narrative. This is bigger than black or white or left or right. Civil service checks for grandma being held hostage. Oh, I don't think the majority of wellness checks end up with somebody being held hostage. But if the social worker that went to go check on your grandmother found out that there was like Al-Qaeda in the house holding your grandmother hostage, I would be okay with the social worker calling armed police at that point. I think that would be obvious. As far as it being bigger than black, white, left, or right, I agree with you. However, it disproportionately affects black people in this country. Black people are policed more in this country. For instance, the easiest example, marijuana. We know that white and black people use marijuana at the same rates across the United States of America. But as a black person, you are 3.7 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana than you would be if you were white. You can look at the Philando Castile example. If you want to say that police brutality or overuse of police force affects both white and black people, I agree with you. We'll just pretend it's Russian roulette, okay? You may get off on this instance completely okay, and on the other hand, you may have a bad roll of the dice. Philando Castile was pulled over 52 times before he was ultimately killed by an officer. I have not been pulled over 52 times in my life. If you and I are playing a game of Russian roulette, and I have 5 pulls of the trigger, and you've got 52, the odds are on you having the worst outcome. And that's what's going on right now. But if the fact that it's Black Lives Matter just happens to offend you, support police reform. Black people will be helped more by it. But if black is the word that's turning you off, I don't think anybody's going to object if you back the ultimate goal of supporting police reform. Rusky, what about the argument that all states have been admitted into statehood in pairs? I don't know that all states have been admitted in pairs, but I don't see that as a valid reason to deny 700,000 plus American citizens who are paying federal taxes in the United States representation in Congress. To me, DC statehood is literally taxation without representation. We fought a war about that in 1776. It seems like they should have representation, and they want it. Rusky, Russians don't play roulette with a gun. You all need to come up with another name. Fair enough. I apologize if I offended you, but it is a common terminology over here, and I'm pretty sure you're being sarcastic, and I'm going to keep using the term until I can come up with a better term for it. I'm unaware of any better terms that anybody would know that I was trying to communicate. Hardwood and Sock, I didn't bring it up earlier, but the cop in the Jacob Blake shooting was just put back on the street. He got no charges against him. You'd have to jog my memory on the Jacob Blake shooting. Curtis, BLM is a joke. The leader just bought 3 houses. You can make the argument that the leader is a joke, but that has nothing to do with the, actual stated purpose of BLM and police reform. By your own admission, you've already said that police brutality is a thing that affects black, white, left, and center. So obviously they're pointing to a real problem. Rack, he even let the officer know about the legal gun he had at his car, and his child and partner were in the car. The officer created a more dangerous situation. He let the officer know he was a concealed carry person. He had a concealed carry permit, and that he had the weapon in his car. The officer then told him to reach for his identification and license, and he did so, and he got shot with his partner and his child in the car. It was a complete mess. That's also when the complete tragedy. That's also when the NRA lost me entirely, because I'm fairly pro Second Amendment. When they didn't speak up for Philandro Castile, a concealed carry weapons permit holder who did what he was supposed to do and still got shot. Yeah, NRA is just purely politics. They don't give a damn about firearms rights anymore. Jacob Blake had a knife in his car. He also had warrants. When did self-accountability become an issue? From Rusky. Philandro, I understand being upset about. Could you clarify on the self-accountability part becoming an issue? I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to. BLM, the organization, is a joke, but the movement makes sense from Hardwood and Sock. I don't even know that I would say BLM, the organization, is a joke. And you have chapters across the country. Some are better than others. I would agree with that. But they've certainly done a great job collectively of bringing eyes to this problem. Like I said, you can disagree with what the individual leader did or didn't do. I don't really have I haven't done enough research on it to have an opinion, because I consider it kind of irrelevant. It doesn't address the larger problem. Thoughts on SRA? Socialist Rifle Association, if I remember correctly, Rack? That's the Left Gun Rights Association? Yeah, I'm in favor of that. Rusky, everything we're seeing, Jacob Blake, Micaiah Bryant, George Floyd. Jacob Blake was, again, I asked somebody to jog my memory. For Jacob Blake, wasn't that the one where the gentleman was out of the car walking back to his car? There were like 4 officers present, and then they shot him. And then the justification was like, oh yeah, and we found a knife in his car, like after the fact. If you have 4 officers on the scene, there's got to be a better way to handle it than just shooting somebody that's currently unarmed. Micaiah Bryant, I'm okay with. I think that's justified. The kid that was shot in Minnesota was Toledo, which I spoke to earlier. I basically think that was the worst possible outcome. The officer should not have had a strobe light. I think the strobe light contributed hugely to the problem, like what caused it. But I can understand the justification for that one. I wouldn't be in favor of prosecuting him. I don't think it was ever established that he reached for it, Rusky. I may be misremembering the Jacob Blake. I'm not sure. Warrant should not equal execution by the state. I agree entirely, Rick. For Rusky and Curtis, again, I just want to clarify. I'm not saying abolish all police, and I'm not saying that deadly force or use of force is never justified. So don't misunderstand my position. I'm saying there are clear instances where it has gone overboard, and when we try to hold these officers accountable, conservatives seem to have a problem with it. If you want to point and say, hey, there's some instances where I think police use was justified and I think BLM is wrong, I'm going to agree with you. If you want to point to but when I point to other instances like George Floyd and say this man was executed on the side of the street without or without his constitutional right to a trial being honored, let's be civil here and be honest with each other. It's not all or nothing. Hardwood and sock, there are big differences between George Floyd and Ma'Khia Bryant. Absolutely. Hardwood, did you hear the tapes when he said, I've eaten too many drugs? Absolutely. But that's why he should have been in a recovery position much sooner instead of being, still have a knee on his neck 2.5 minutes, 2 minutes into when he was unresponsive. Departmental policy was to move a controlled subject to the recovery position as soon as you had them under control, not to remove them from the car and then put your knee on their neck for 9.5 minutes. What happened until innocent until proven guilty? A warrant means they need to appear in court, not a death sentence. Exactly. Honesty has to be a standpoint of truth. What am I saying that is factually inaccurate? Have I ever worked in first response? No, I worked in the military though. What other platforms am I streaming on, Curtis? I'm streaming on Twitch, Facebook, and YouTube. Knee was on the shoulder. The video disproved that. Sorry. I know the defense tried to make that case, but even the defense, if I recall correctly, basically said he moved his knee back and forth. Rusky, Curtis, it was on the back of the neck, shoulder. Yeah, it was like right here. Hardwood and sock to Rusky. The drugs, I believe, did play a factor along with the heart disease, but that does not negate the fact that the knee for 9 minutes caused the final outcome. I agree. And that's the short version. And even if somebody already has a fatal condition, you killing them before they die from it doesn't excuse it. You don't get to shorten somebody's life just because they might die someday from something else. Even Floyd's friends told him to just sit down and chill out. Yeah, for the first few minutes. And then after the first couple of minutes, they started telling the officer, he's in control. He's clearly not a threat. Why the hell are you still sitting on his neck? You're going to kill the man. He can't breathe. I don't understand why you want to die on this hill, man. I really don't. Even the chief of police and the training officer for the Minneapolis Police Department have said this was not policy. It's going to be interesting to see what happens on appeal, though. Chief of police is a political position. The training officer is not a political position. Gotta go, Hardwood and Sock. Hey, thanks for dropping in. I still appreciate it. I love it when you call in, man. It's always a great discussion. I'm not going to disagree that chief of police is a political position. Rusky, by that definition, anybody that's appointed by the chief is going to be a political position. So literally every single police officer is going to be a political position. Okay, so then your position becomes irrelevant. Oh, backing off on it. I guess you spoke before I spoke or something along those lines. C. Bergeron 798. How long should it take to arrest someone? They were waiting for medics. I'm fine with arresting the man. I'm saying you don't need to kneel on his neck for 2.5 minutes in a control position when departmental policy after they were in control is to move them to a recovery position for exactly this reason. I think they've got a case to take it to appeal. I don't think they'll get an appeal. My understanding is departmental policy was to to move an individual from face down, chest down, legs pinned up, body controlled down, to on their side so that they can breathe easier and recover from the hold position. That is my understanding. But again, I am not a member of the Minneapolis Police Department, nor have I received that training. Recovery is face down on left side. So he's on his left side. And that's departmental policy. You agree with me. And he was not moved to that position. You agree with me. So Officer Chauvin did not follow departmental policy or what he'd been trained to do. I mean, I see you're laughing, but I don't understand why. Maxine Waters gave them a perfect appeal. I think she gave them cause to appeal. Again, I don't think it changes any of the facts of the case. Rusky 5150, bro, if you haven't been through it, you really shouldn't speak on it at all. Wow. The time for silence. C. Bergeron 798, thank you for the follow. Okay, so have you ever been a chief of police for the Department of Minneapolis? Because if you haven't, you shouldn't speak on it at all. Have you ever been high on fentanyl while having an officer kneel on your neck? Because if you haven't, you shouldn't speak on it at all. Have you ever been black and American, a subject of police brutality? Because if not, you shouldn't speak on, Black Lives Matter at all. Have you ever been an elected official like Maxine Waters to Congress? Because if not, you shouldn't speak on it at all. Have you ever been a police officer trained under the Minneapolis Police Department? Because if not, you shouldn't speak on it at all. Even you don't believe that ridiculousness. Come on, man, be honest. Been in medical? Okay, so you haven't been a police officer, so you shouldn't speak on it at all. Okay. C. Bergeron 798, exactly. Why is Maxine Waters not being charged with insurrection? Caller, I'll get to you in a second. The short version is she didn't organize an event and she didn't tell anybody to march down to the Capitol to overturn a constitutionally mandated process to validate the election. And saying they would never secure their rights without fighting and that they were going to lose everything. Furthermore, she didn't spread the lie for, months that election fraud was a problem.
To your Derek Chauvin stuff here.
Hey, Rusty, you're on the air. Welcome.
Hey, let's talk about this. So first off, let me correct you on some things, my friend. One, I've worked EMS my entire adult life.
Okay, so you're not a police officer?
Overdose on fentanyl.
So you're not a police officer?
Let me speak.
So you're not a police officer?
Let me speak, why don't you?
So you're not a police officer?
This is the problem that you leftists have. I have asked you several.
Okay, so you're muted because this is going to be a back and forth. You're going to get a chance to say what you want to say, but I'm going to get a chance to ask clarifying questions and go through it. Okay. So if you've worked EMS, that's good. You're a first responder, but have you ever been a police officer?
Hold on 1 second.
Okay. You're back off mute.
First off,
have you ever been a police officer?
Have you?
I'm not the one saying that I can't talk about it. You're the one saying unless you've done the job, you can't talk about it. You did.
I'm saying you shouldn't speak about it.
Okay, well, have you been a police officer?
And like I just was trying to explain to you, dumbass, no, I have not been a police officer.
Okay, so by your logic, you shouldn't speak about it.
What I have done is worked in EMS.
Okay, so you're back on mute. So by your logic, you shouldn't speak about it because you haven't been a police officer. So we can either agree that we're both not police officers and we still want to talk about it, and then we can move forward, or we can't even make that concession, in which case you're just playing party politics since you want to talk about it. So can we agree, even though we're both not police officers, that we still want to talk about this? You're back off mute. So can we agree that since we're both not police officers, we still want to talk about it?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's irrelevant.
Let me ask you a question then. Let me ask you a clarifying question.
Of course.
How many experiences and how many people have you treated who had a fentanyl overdose?
0.
0.
Yes.
Exactly. So why would you place somebody in a recovery position who is actively overdosing?
So that's departmental policy. Police departmental policy.
I'm asking you a question. Stop for a moment and honestly answer. Why would you put somebody in a recovery position who is actively overdosing? You don't have a clue. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, so let me pause you.
You don't have
the
ability to speak on this.
Can I answer?
Because you don't have a clue to what you're talking about.
Can I answer?
Go ahead.
Okay, so.
Yeah, go ahead. Tell us why you would put somebody in a recovery position.
Okay.
Who is still
are you going to let me answer, or are you going to tell me my answer for me?
I'm just asking you a question.
And I'm trying to answer you, and you're not allowing me to. Like I said, this is going to be a back and forth.
That's what you did to me. See, you talk over to people.
Okay, you're back on mute so I can answer your question. Okay, so the question was asked, why would I, not an EMT, put somebody who was overdosing on fentanyl in a recovery position? My answer is because if I was Officer Chauvin, who was also not an EMT, I would trust the police department that I worked for and the training I received to provide medical guidance on why I would put somebody in a recovery position. That's why I received training on areas that are not my area of expertise. Like when I was in the military and I was taught how and when to place a tourniquet, I still hadn't been an EMT, but I would follow that training. Does that answer your question? You're back off mute.
Okay, so now what does a tourniquet do to a person at their limb? And why is it that you think that every officer is not trained as an EMT or a first responder? Have you ever been to a police academy, sir?
Have I ever been to a police academy? No, but I also took first aid training when I was in the military, and that does not make me an EMT.
Oh, I know how to apply a bandage. Oh, I know how to apply a bandage. I'm a good boy.
Okay.
Jesus Christ. You're the problem with the leftists, though.
I'm the problem with the
leftists. You want to talk about things that you've never done anything to make your community better.
I never done anything to make my community better. I served in the United States Army and protected this country and swore an oath to uphold and defend the United States Constitution, and I've never done anything to help this community.
How long were you in the military, and what was your MOS?
I was 11 Alpha. I was an infantry officer.
For how long?
What does it matter? I've served my country.
Because I want to know how long you were in. So what?
Are you going
to other people?
Okay, so they serve their country. I'm happy that we disagree politically, but let's not pretend like nobody has ever served this country.
Have you ever seen combat?
No, and I don't claim to.
So there you go. You've never served your country. You sat in a uniform and you collected a check for nothing.
Oh, okay. So now you're going to now because we disagree politically, you're against military too. Okay, that's nice to know. So anybody who served in the Cold War, anybody who served in the Cold War that didn't see combat, anybody who served in the Cold War that didn't see combat, they didn't serve their country, fuck them. I just want to clarify your position here.
Stop fucking grifting for extra support.
Okay, so anybody who served in the military, if they didn't see combat, we're going to mute you again. Anybody who served in the military, just so you know, from Rusty here, if you didn't see combat when you served in the military, you're just grifting and you didn't actually serve your country. You were just wearing a uniform and taking money for nothing. You didn't do anything else to serve your country.
Yeah, it's people like you who took money for sitting in a uniform who didn't do anything for your country.
Did you ever serve in the military, sir?
The military is nothing more than a grift.
Did you ever serve in the military, sir?
Bro, you ever heard of stolen valor?
Did you ever serve in the military, sir?
You ever heard of stolen valor?
Yes, I've heard of stolen valor. That's claiming to serve in the military when you didn't.
People like you who claim that they were in the military, who didn't do shit, who probably run around thinking that they deserve all these rewards and blah, blah, blah.
Brother,
And
I'm not
actually,
going to submit my
like
DD-214 to your fucking inspection. I'm under no obligation to do that. I've done my service. I'm sorry that hurts your feelings that somebody who served this country in the military can actually disagree with you politically.
Let's stop and talk for a moment. What is serving the country? What is serving anybody? Isn't it doing something to make something better? What did the military do during your service to make this country better?
Oh, well, I mean, I helped put out, or I helped serve during forest fires in the state of Alaska. So we put out forest fires and provided support for evacuation and stuff like that for areas affected by forest fires.
So why aren't you doing that now if you want to make the community better?
Why am I not doing that? Why am I not doing what now? Serving in the military?
Fighting forest fires.
Fighting forest fires? Because I didn't want to fight forest fires for the rest of my life. I don't know.
Oh, you don't. So what other training did you do? What else did you do in the military that you served this country?
I was an infantry officer. I already told you.
Okay, what did you do that served the country, that made your community any better?
Protect, uphold, and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
So the same oath that a cop takes, the same oath that
a cop does not take an oath to the Constitution of the United States.
Bro.
Are you sitting here saying that police? Are you sitting here saying that police take an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States?
Yeah, I actually do have proof if you want to see it, fuckface. Just to let you know.
Are you sitting here saying that the police take an oath? Okay, you're back on mute again. Okay. Next caller, I'll get to you in just a second because we're about to wrap this up anyway. Rusty, I'm going to give you a chance to say your final word when I take you off mute. But my only question is, because you seem to make the claim that police take an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, which I am unaware of. Anyhow, you're back off mute.
Oh, you just continue to mute me. I thought this was a commentary in that conversation.
It is, but when you're not being responsive, like I told you at the beginning, we're going to have a back and forth. I know you just want to scream fuckface and all this kind of stuff, but that's not accomplishing anything.
No, what I want to do is actually have a actual conversation with somebody who knows what they're talking about. But you keep on throwing things at people like, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. So you want to make claims about people and what they have done, but you've only served in the military for 4 years and fought some forest fires, so you're a national hero now?
I never claimed to be a national hero.
Give me a break, bro.
Okay. Well, thank you for calling in. I hope I catch you next time, brother.
I hope so, too. I hope you continue to have this call-in show. This will be fun.
Oh, it always is. Every Sunday, 2 to 4 p.m. Pacific. I'm running a little bit over this time around.
Oh, okay, cool.
But yeah, I'll catch you next time.
Because the time you should have been done.
Yeah, I should have been done an hour ago. I'm running over. But thank you for calling in. Hopefully next time we can make more progress civilly. Have a good one.
Yeah, maybe next time we can have some education.
That was Rusty, who thinks that police take the same oath as the military, apparently, and that those who serve in the military, unless you have seen active combat, you are not serving your country. He also thinks that unless you have physically done the job, that you have no right to speak about it. So he and I both should not be able to speak about what Officer Chauvin did. Martin says he would like to talk about DC becoming the 53rd state. It's pretty sure that the autocorrect or the translation caught you. But anyway, welcome to the show, Martin. What do you have to say?
Oh, well, actually, I said the 51st. So
I had a feeling that the auto screener gets it a little bit wrong sometimes.
I'd just like to know what your opinion on that is, and what do you think? What's your opinion on that? Should DC become the 51st?
Yes, would be my short version. The longer version, to give you just a quick synopsis. Initially, my reaction was kind of like, I'm not sure. And the more I researched into it for this episode, there's 700,000 Americans who live there. They pay the most in taxes, federal taxes, per capita, per person, than any other state in the country. They currently have no voting representation in Congress whatsoever. They have one member of the House that cannot vote. Maryland does not want DC to be a part of Maryland. The last polling data that I found was from 2016. If somebody can find something more recent that can show that they do, that I would be open to that. But Maryland doesn't want those American citizens living in DC currently to come back into Maryland. And this whole country was founded on, no taxation without representation. These are American citizens who are paying more per person in taxes than anybody else. And they're currently no representation for them in Congress. The counter argument that I've seen boils down to, well, the founders didn't want the capital district to be a city. Okay, well, you can define what a district is, and this would still retain a district and provide American citizens that are living there with no representation. There's no minimum limit in the Constitution for the size of the District of Columbia or the federal district. There's a maximum limit, but there's not a minimum. So shrinking it, which has already been done historically once in this country, I don't see an argument against that, especially considering we've already done it once. And then the other argument that exists is, well, it's going to give Democrats more power. I see that, but that doesn't seem to be a good reason to not give them representation. Like if we go back to 1776, there were people in British Parliament saying we don't want to give the American colonies the right to vote because they might not vote the way we want. And you don't get to tell people, American citizens, they don't get to vote just because you don't like what the outcome might be. I mean, that doesn't work for me, if that makes sense. So that's kind of where I'm at on it. But again, I'm more than welcome to your opinions or anything that I might be missing.
Well, unfortunately, I had several different subjects, and that was one of them. And I'm just wondering.
No, you can ask another question. I mean, you don't have to argue with me about it.
Okay. Well, I guess it's a couple of things. One is, I'd like to know what your opinion is of the Chauvin situation.
The short version of the Chauvin verdict, I think that pulling the man, Mr. Floyd, back out of the car and then kneeling on his neck for 9 minutes when he's already in handcuffs and then him dying, I think the prosecution did a good job of proving that that was not police policy, and that the medical experts the prosecution bought did an excellent job of, proving that had he not had his neck kneeled on for 9.5 minutes, that he wouldn't have died. I think a lot of the confusion on the Chauvin verdict refers specifically to the murder 2 verdict. In Minnesota, my understanding, disclaimer, I'm not an attorney, is murder 2 specifically in Minnesota is basically like felony assault. Felony assault falls under murder 2. So they're saying that since Chauvin didn't follow policy, kneeling on the guy's neck for 9.5 minutes, kneeling on Mr. Floyd's neck for 9.5 minutes qualified as assault. Therefore, it became murder, or it became murder 2 because he died from a felony assault. That's my understanding. In a lot of states, it wouldn't have fallen under murder 2, but because it was in Minnesota and that's the way their laws read, that's the reason he got a guilty charge on the murder verdict. Does that make sense?
Well, I do understand what you're saying, but, I do have a very vast medical background. And the way I looked at it, yes, the prosecution, the multitude of prosecutors that they had, the lawyers they had, yes, I think they did their job as far as it pretty much, I mean, their whole case pretty much was 9 minutes and 29 seconds. And, I absolutely believe that this was multitude of things, not just one thing. And the other thing is, kneeling on his back of his neck, kneeling on the back of his neck, I would like to know where they figured, you're not cutting off the carotid or the jugular. So, and even if he was on that whole right side of his, of where the arteries are pumping blood, you also have the other side, and you have the circle of Willis, which supplies the brain. So the brain's not going to lose any oxygen just by that alone.
So my understanding, and you'll have to forgive me because I watched the majority of the trial, but I didn't watch it this week. My understanding was basically that you could, by kneeling on the neck, either keep oxygenated blood from getting into the brain or from exiting the brain type of situation. And that's what the pulmonologists and the medical experts who testified for the prosecution said was basically the cause. Basically that you could deprive somebody of oxygen without having to physically, choke them to death. And that's why you didn't have any ligature marks.
Well, I've worked in pulmonary a lot, and I have to disagree with that. Like I said, the other side, you got the same jugular and carotid going up to the brain, and you got what they call the circle of Willis up there, which circles the brain and feeds all the veins up there, and then it exits the same way. So, as far as him being on and absolutely including the right side, I'm not saying that he obviously didn't play a part in this.
Okay.
But I also believe that there was multitude. The prosecution wants to just think that there's absolutely nothing to do with drugs, and unless you know drugs, I deal with fentanyl all the time. I would give fentanyl to patients. Now I wouldn't give the meth, obviously.
Yeah.
But I mean, these are two. He got it from the streets. He didn't get it from a pharmacy. He didn't. So, who's to say that what's in it was not really bad stuff?
So my understanding would be that would be the medical examiner there that declared it was a homicide, right? That's who would decide, and who was to say.
I think that you have different experts saying that the levels that they were at could by itself be a cause of death. But that
I agree with you.
One. Okay.
So
you
let me clarify. I'm not trying to cut you off, but I think you're at a good point for me to kind of answer a question or respond to a statement here. I agree with you that different experts said different things, right? Obviously, the jury in this particular instance found the experts that the prosecution brought a whole lot more convincing than the evidence that the defense presented. I think you and I would agree with that. And even you were saying that obviously Officer Chauvin's actions contributed to this outcome, right?
Well, I mean, you gotta understand, okay? Me being medical, if I hear of anybody, no matter what it is, if I hear anybody say that there's no pulse, you can bet your ass I'm going to be, doing some compressions. The ventilation's kind of going by the wayside, but you want to start pumping the blood.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that in that situation, I just, to me, you just can't narrow it down to one thing. Okay, the one thing is he was on his neck, he was on his back, and he caused the death. Well, no, I think there was a percentage of that, possibly. I think the drugs in the system, you have an upper or a downer, and they're fighting. Okay, now they said, okay, well, he stopped. He stopped for a little while, and then he went back to it. Okay, and I can tell you right now that that when you go back, it can be more dangerous than if you just maintained a regular level in your system. So,
no, I have that understanding as well. I think.
Okay, so.
I think had.
I would be done, but.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I guess you want me to hurry up, but I guess the point that I'm trying to make is the drugs in the system. I'm going to probably say something that maybe some people don't like, and you know what? Actually, I don't really care because this is my opinion. But if you add all that stuff up, okay, the drugs in the system, that tumor that he had, which can and cannot secrete adrenaline, which okay, that's another upper. And then he also I don't know exactly which coronary arteries they were talking about, so excuse that part. But on one side he had 75% occlusion, on the other side he had 90% occlusion. Unless you've dealt with patients that are like that in itself can also kill people.
Yeah.
And I'm not, nobody, okay, obviously, Floyd shouldn't have died because he was passing a counterfeit bill. That doesn't make any sense at all. Should have been, he should have gone to jail. They should have tried him or whatever about that.
Okay, you and I agree there.
Oh, okay, obviously. I mean, that nobody deserves to die like, for that. But, okay, the thing is, and again, part of the multitude of reasons is, okay, did the drugs play a part in his being paranoid? And because the first thing he did when they tapped on the window, of course, they did have a gun. And don't shoot me. And I can probably understand about that.
Yeah,
but
I can too.
It wasn't the first, but it wasn't the first time that a year before that the same thing happened. So now you got him out, you put him in cuffs, and you walk him over. He sits down. He's fairly cooperative at that. But then the part that he's not cooperative. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can still hear you. I'm just trying not to interrupt you too much, except to let you know where I agree or disagree.
Okay, so they walked him over to the squad car, and then they tried to put him in the car. Okay, he didn't want to go. He fought, and
he resisted while in cuffs. I don't think fought is the word I would use, but I understand what you're trying to relay.
Okay, I don't always use the politically correct word, but
I'm not worried about politically correct, man. I let the last guy say fuck a few times. I've said it myself before. I'm just trying to I know there's probably not many people who haven't seen this, incident by this point in time, but for like the one guy that might be in my stream that hasn't seen it, I don't want him thinking George Floyd was like swinging at officers. That's the only reason I clarify.
No. I mean, he was in cuffs. Unless he's going to bring his legs up to his arms. But the thing is, he fought. He did not want to go there. And he resisted the best he could. They got him on one side, then he pushed himself out the other side. So then they pulled him out the rest. And then, sorry, I'm not a cop, but I'm going to tell you that I've dealt with some really irate family members, okay, in the hospital and stuff. And they can be very distracting, and you want to be able to still maintain as a professional. You want to maintain what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
But human nature is going to say, hey, he didn't pull out his mace because that female firefighter was approaching him. You don't do that, okay? Period. she was right as far as telling the cops, hey, check, is he breathing, all that. And I totally understand. But the thing is, the crowd was getting rowdy. That black dude was really mouthy, okay?
Well, and I can understand that. So,
right. But the thing is,
let me see if I can fast forward this. Okay.
Oh, okay.
So we don't have to run. Well, no. So even if we ran through the whole situation, right, and said everything that happened was justified up until the point where Floyd became non-responsive, and then Chauvin continued to kneel on him for another, 2.5 minutes? Right? Everything before that point was justified. Let's just say that for the sake of argument. I think that your case and the case you're presenting as, the defense witness right now might have flown with the jury. Like, he followed police procedure. And then, when Mr. Floyd was obviously not capable of resisting anymore, he moved him into a recovery position per police, procedure. And then, he had a faulty heart or whatever the case was. And, it might have contributed, but it might not have.
For silence is over.
And we can't put it all on the officer. I think that last 2.5 minutes was probably what put it overboard for the jury, but that's speculation on my part.
How long if somebody is without blood going to the brain, in other words, a heartbeat, how long before now, so in other words, approximately, how long was it from the time that he supposedly, or let's say the officer, one of the other officers checked the pulse, said there was no pulse. From that point until the point that the ambulance got there.
I don't recall off the top of my head. I'm just saying from the people sitting on the jury, hearing competing evidence from both sides and giving both, okay, let's say everybody found, both sides equal. I don't think that's what happened, but let's say they found your argument and the coroner's argument and the pulmonologist who testified, for the prosecution, they found all that equal. I think that last 2.5 minutes kneeling on somebody's neck who's clearly unresponsive with your hands in your pockets off and on, I think that's going to be hard to get past. I really do.
Okay, well, the other thing that I want you to think about also is, if you don't get blood to the brain, oxygenated blood to the brain within about 4, 5, 6 minutes, right around there, 8 minutes, you're absolutely brain dead. But you have to get going with the CPR as soon as possible.
Yeah.
The ambulance people did not start CPR right away. They got Floyd in the ambulance and they started messing around trying. I mean, they had to put an OI into his shin, okay, for an IV access. But they didn't start CPR until they pulled out of there, and then they stopped and waited for another fire station or a fire truck to come to help. That's what the guy said. How much time elapsed before they actually started pumping? So I think there's a little part to that maybe the ambulance people should have started as soon as they got him in the truck, or maybe even on the ground.
Or maybe Officer Chauvin should have started when he was unresponsive.
Maybe, absolutely, but.
Being as charitable as possible as I can be from what I've seen, right? Because obviously I don't think you and I are ever going to agree on this, but trying to be as charitable as possible, imagining myself on the jury, right? I think had you reached the George Floyd's unresponsive, even though I disagree with pulling him out of the police car in the first place to put him on the ground, okay? They do that, and I won't hold that against him for the sake of this, right? And then they kneel on his neck for, 7 minutes, right? And then he becomes unresponsive. And okay, it takes him half a minute to notice that Floyd isn't responsive, okay? And then for 2 minutes, if he'd pulled him over and started trying to do CPR and trying to, do respiration, all this kind of stuff, I could see maybe somebody on the jury saying, well, shit, it wasn't the outcome we wanted. Nobody should die over a $20 counterfeit. But that's not what happened.
Right, and I'm not, like I said, I'm not saying that Chauvin didn't, shoulder some responsibility, but all three counts. And I know that you're probably not going to agree with me, but that's okay. I'm going to say it anyway if I can.
Yeah, you're free to. You've been more than civil. You're welcome to call back anytime. You can say what you need to say.
Okay. The other thing is when this happened to Floyd last year, what happened? And I mean, again, I'm trying to make a point, which is you have to put everything. You take everything as a totality. But what happened to all the different places? How many riots and how many people died because of this? Because they were pissed off and upset because of police brutality and all that. But how many people, innocent people, died because people were rioting and stuff? And I'm going to be perfectly honest. I absolutely believe that the jury will take that into consideration. What's going to happen to us? If we did come back with maybe even a not guilty verdict or whatever, they have to live in the same community. They know the people will obviously know who you are. I'm not saying that that's always obviously the right thing, but it does happen. And, I'm just wondering if that didn't play some part in, people feeling the way they do. Because they want to be safe too. They don't want to get beat up or shot or killed because the verdict they come up with.
So, again, to be charitable, right? It may have. But you could make the same argument from the opposite side that, if they had let him off, it's because they would have been worried about the, police all sticking together and harassing the hell out of him, writing tickets or arresting him for no reason or whatever the case is. Whoever makes that claim, by necessity, takes on a burden of proof to prove that's what caused it, right? So we can sit here and hypothesize all day long, but neither one of us know, right?
Well, actually, I do know. I know pretty much everything. So
okay. Well, I appreciate that. I definitely need to talk to you more often then.
Well, I tell you, now can I ask you where you out of?
Las Vegas, but I travel around the country for work Monday through Friday.
Oh, well, I'm out of Colorado.
Oh, yeah, so, I've been to Colorado a few times. I used to go to school in New Mexico, and we'd take winter breaks up there so we could go snowboarding and stuff. Great state. I love it.
Okay. Well, and like I said, I'm this thing here, I watched the trial because unfortunately, I'm recovering from a broken neck. I broke that a couple of years ago and I'm still going through things. But, so I was able to watch pretty much the whole thing. And if what I couldn't see, then I would tape and watch later. But I just think that, yes, he does have to shoulder some responsibility as far as that. But to, as far as I'm concerned, it's a lot more multifaceted or focal or whatever you want to call it than just 9/20/29. And the thing is, they didn't actually. I mean, I saw several times, when they got him in the squad car, he really, he went almost flat on his on the seat and then tried to push himself out himself. Then they got to the point where they had to pull him out.
I don't know that you had to pull him out. I mean, you could have shut the fucking door. I mean, that's just my opinion. But hey, we've been running for 25 minutes for your call right now, so I'm going to give you a chance to get in your last, your final words, and then hopefully I hear from you again next week.
Well, I'm going to definitely keep this open, but I mean, it was a tragedy. There's a lot of things that could have gone a different way. Unfortunately, I just think that, and I'm not saying that he should have been given a free ride, but I am saying, because I do absolutely back the police 100% because they got a tough job. And by the way, I'm also military. I'm 18 years Navy, and I also served in the Gulf War. So, unfortunately, I would like to have maybe been part of the other conversation because, you know, whatever you guys were talking about, I just got the tail end of it. But
yeah,
anyway,
he basically just wanted to discount my opinion because I disagreed with him. And he said, what have you ever done to serve your community? And I said, well, I served in the military. And he's like, oh, well, what conflict did you serve in? And I said, I didn't serve in any conflict, nor have I claimed to. And then he said, well, then you were just grifting. And at that point, I was pretty much done with the conversation, to be honest with you.
well, like I said, I just heard the last part, and yeah, he kind of went off the deep end.
I think he just got frustrated because we disagreed, and we can have civil conversations and disagree. The first caller, Hardwood and Sock, has called in 4 or 5 times. He's a conservative that lives up in Pennsylvania. Great guy. We disagree on plenty of things, and we go back and forth. You seem like a very nice guy. We've talked back and forth. You agree that Chauvin should have had some consequences. You just don't agree with the murder charge sticking. I think that all 3 were justified. We can agree and disagree on that stuff, but we can have a civil conversation, and I think that's the most important thing to do. I think the caller prior to you just got frustrated because you've never been a cop? Well, then you can't speak to it. So when I asked him if he'd ever been a cop, no, he had never been a cop, but he still wanted to talk about it, and he got frustrated right out the gate.
Just out of curiosity, what was his slant on that Chauvin thing?
I don't know that we ever really got to much of the Chauvin stuff because he just wanted to throw insults, to be honest with you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was a shame. You and I definitely got a lot further in it.
Well, I think nowadays this is what people should be doing is talking. And, you disagree with me, that's fine. I disagree with you, that's fine too. I'm right, you're wrong, and there's nothing we can do about that. But now, can I,
I think you and I agree that a big problem right now is that both sides aren't talking to each other. I think a lot of people are very much listening to what their talking heads are saying about the opposition. Whether you're listening to Rachel Maddow or whether you're listening to Tucker Carlson, you're not talking to a conservative, you're not talking to somebody who's a progressive. And a lot of, hey, maybe you've got some good ideas that I haven't thought of. Maybe I've got some good ideas that you haven't thought of. But we need to talk to each other to figure it out. And just listening to the talking heads doesn't get us there. But anyway, 30 seconds, brother, and then I got to let you go.
Well, I will absolutely call back. And the conversation is unlimited. We can go in any direction.
Yeah. Generally, I limit the conversation to today's show, whatever the topic is for today's show, and last week's show. But if you have an off-the-wall question that you want to ask, as long as you're okay with me saying, hey, I'm not familiar with that subject, but this is my general opinion so far based on what I know, yeah, you can ask me anything.
Okay. Well, first off, what's your name? What's your first name?
Chris.
Chris. Okay, Chris. No, I don't watch the Today Show. I don't watch a whole lot of TV that much at all. So I don't watch Today, so I won't be able to tell you what the topics are. So
No. I meant my stream currently today, what's in the title, not the Today Show.
Oh.
Yeah,
okay.
so like this one was on DC Statehood, and last week's was BLM and policing in America, right? So those are kind of the two things I'm centered around. If you want to ask me something like off the wall, like what did I think about, Russia threatening the Ukraine, I can speak to that, but I'm not obviously going to be as well informed with sources behind me immediately. So like the Chauvin verdict stuff, I have watched that, right? But I don't have like 20 sources ready for me because I didn't do a full stream on the Chauvin trial.
Oh, I got you. Well,
but I think that's going to wrap us up, Martin. I appreciate you calling in, my man.
No, I got you. If you can just tell me what you're going to be talking about next week.
It depends on what happens topically during the week, but if you follow me on Twitter or if you notify on the YouTube bit, it'll be on the title as soon as I've got to see what's trending during the week politically.
Okay, I got you. All right, well, listen, you take it easy.
You as well. You can also find it on the website on upcoming episodes. So if you go to theleftSpeaks.com, click on upcoming episodes. Like I said, depending on what's trending about Wednesday, Thursday is usually when I update it, and the title will pop up there.
Okay, will do. Well, thank you, Chris. Talk to you later.
Thank you. I appreciate it, man. Great call. Welcome anytime. All right, everybody. I think that is going to wrap us up for today. I apologize that I have not had a whole lot of chance to keep up with chat. The one thing I kind of caught was apparently Rusky was upset that I referred to him as Rusty. Rusty, the auto mod, the auto screener for the call-in queue, caught you. It said that your name was Rusty, the same way that it has, miscalculated. I think it was Martin that just called in about DC statehood and said the 53rd state instead of the 51st. If that's what got you off on the wrong foot with me, I apologize. But you are more than welcome to call in next episode. I am already an hour and a half past due, so I have to get off of here and go spend some time with my family. Everybody, if you have not already, like, follow, subscribe on social media. You can get updates from me. You can find links to the episode on YouTube. I would also recommend you might want to click the bell notification for when I go live, because this is more of a show than it is a live stream. Every Sunday, 2 to 4 p.m. Pacific. And if you want to find clips of just the calls or just specific stances, you can find that on the YouTube channel instead of having to watch the whole stream. Those usually get uploaded throughout the week. Again, thank you everybody for calling in. I need to straighten out my call screener. See you next time. Appreciate you being here. The call screener is automated, brother. There's nothing I can do about it. It's a text voice to text thing. So unless you know how to program better than whatever Microsoft or Google or whatever program they're using to do the voice to text, I don't have a solution for it. But anyway, thank you everybody for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it. And Cave Dwelling Cannibal Witch, thank you for the follow. That's the one I missed. Intro as the exit, and everybody have a wonderful rest of your weekend.
I do believe that we shall overcome. I believe blackness shines brighter than the sun. I do believe that the time is now, and I refuse to ever have to bow